I'd been riding solo in the patrol cruiser for maybe 3 hours when the call came through. It was a welfare check, possible intoxicated male stumbling onto private property on the outskirts of Thornton Crossing. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, soft static edging every third word. Unit 14, you copy. 1023, a welfare check on County Road 112, north of Highway 7. Caller reports subject wandering near the abandoned Avery farmhouse. Proceed with caution. I flicked on the overhead lights, blue and white strobes pulsing against the dark, tarmacked road, and acknowledged 10-4 dispatch. En route to County Road 112. ETA 5 minutes. My partner, Officer Lisa Martinez, was off duty tonight. Driving solo wasn't my preference, but staffing shortages had been brutal this week. I let out a slow breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Sweat beaded at my hairline. I rubbed the back of my neck, willing myself to focus. The cruiser's engine hummed low, tires whispering over the gravel as I turned north. As I approached the dirt driveway leading to the old Avery property, the streetlights faded completely. Only the cruiser's headlights cut a tunnel of pale yellow through the black. Trees arched overhead, limbs clawing the sky. Rain hung in the humid air. Tiny droplets ticked across the windshield like distant whispers. I slowed the car, rolling down the passenger window. The smell of damp earth and rotting leaves drifted in, laced with something sharper. Stale sweat, ozone, and the faint coppery tang I couldn't place. I glanced at my clipboard. Welfare check. Intoxicated male, thought to be trespassing. It felt mundane, another late-night oddity. I keyed the microphone to update dispatch. 14 to dispatch, outside Avery residence. No sign of subject so far. Investigating on foot. My boots crunched on the damp gravel as I stepped out and locked the cruiser. Lightning flickered in the distance, revealing the silhouette of the farmhouse. Sagging porch roof, broken windows boarded hastily with weathered planks. I shined my flashlight at the battered front door. Paint peeled like sunburned skin, hinges sagged. "Hello? Polk County Sheriff's Office. Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small against the tall pines and churning wind. I moved slowly across the front yard, flashlight beam wavering over collapsed flower pots and rusted lawn chairs. The rain began in earnest, heavy drops thrumming on my jacket and the brim of my cap. I took another step, switching off the beam to let my night vision adjust. In the darkness, I thought I saw motion behind a broken window, something shifting in the shadows. I dimly recalled the caller saying he heard talking, but no one answered when he yelled. Approaching the side of the house, I crouched and peered through a jagged gap in the boards. The living room lay in tatters. Torn curtains hung like ragged sails, furniture overturned, and that dank smell, musty, like wet paper left to rot. I swept the flashlight across the floor. I caught the glint of something. A wine bottle, half empty, label faded, and footprints in the upturned carpet leading toward the hallway. I stepped back as a low moan echoed through the rooms. My heart thudded. "This is Sheriff's Office. If you're inside, come to the door. We're here to help." Silence answered, heavy as a stone. I raised the radio mic. 14 to dispatch, go ahead with an updated ETA for backup. 10 to 14 on scene. Possible disturbance in progress. There was a pause, then dispatch returned. Copy that, 14, backup en route. I took a breath and crossed the threshold. My boots sank into damp floorboards. Each creak reverberated. I flicked the flashlight up the hallway. At the far end, the bedroom door stood half open. Yellow light flickered inside, as though a bulb still burned. I edged closer, pistol drawn but lowered, finger off the trigger. My pulse thrummed, chest tight. I pushed the door with one hand. The bedroom was bare except for a single mattress on the floor. No pillows, no sheets, just a damp, stained mattress. In the corner, a figure lay curled, back facing me. Clothes soaked through, darkening the thin cotton. The man must have been shivering, his body convulsed in shallow convulsions. I kept the beam trained on him as I crossed the threshold. "Sir, Polk County Sheriff's Office. You okay?" My voice echoed off the peeling wallpaper. The man jerked awake, raising his head slowly. His eyes were unfocused, glassy. He lunged to his feet in a panic, yielding only when his knees buckled and he collapsed back onto the mattress. I holstered my pistol and knelt to check his pulse. He was still breathing, but fast, shallow gasps. Bruises ringed his wrists. Dried blood crusted at his temples. I lifted the flashlight to his face. His eyes were heavy-lidded, pupils dilated. "My name's Officer Reed," I said. "Can you tell me your name?" He stammered something I couldn't catch, then coughed. Wet, ragged. His gaze unfocused again. He sagged into the pillow. The overhead light flickered, then died, plunging us into near pitch black. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I keyed the mic again. 14 to dispatch. Found one subject, unconscious but breathing. Likely intoxicated. Requesting ambulance at my location. The radio crackled, then dispatch replied, "Copy 14, ambulance and backup en route." I reached for my phone to clip cuffs on the bed rail, ready to secure him in case he bolted, but his breathing was too consistently labored. I slipped my jacket under his head and prayed the medics arrived quickly. Outside, thunder boomed. My adrenaline receded, replaced by a cold dread that settled in my gut. Something felt off, like the night had changed around me. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, and I couldn't ignore that faint smell, something acrid, like old blood mixing with diesel smoke. 45 minutes later, backup arrived. 2 patrol units and an ambulance's red and white lights scattering across the cracked siding of the Avery farmhouse. I stepped back, letting paramedics take over. They checked vitals while the ambulance tech wrapped the man on the stretcher. He groaned faintly. I nodded to them. 10-4 EMS, thanks. I stood upright, tried to unclench my jaw. My radio crackled. Unit 14, State Trooper Grant is on scene. Anything we need to know? I dipped my head toward the house. Suspect passed out, signs of assault. Not sure what happened before I got here. No signs of forced entry. Trooper Grant, a tall man in dark blue with that stoic jaw he always wore, approached. His boots crunched on the wet grass. I handed him my flashlight. I ran into this, thought I saw movement before I found him on the mattress. He could barely get words out, said he saw someone else inside. Might be mistaken, intoxicated, possible head injury. Grant rubbed his chin. Let me take a look. He stepped inside, sweeping the beam across the room. I stayed at the threshold, eyes drifting back to the dark hallway. Somewhere deep in my side vision, I thought I saw the bedroom light flicker as if someone had entered while I ducked outside. But when I looked again, Grant was alone. He emerged, shaking his head. Nothing further. No other footprints apart from his, no blood trails. The bruising looks old. Possibly he was already beaten before calling in. His eyes studied the warped floor. House itself seems empty. I'll clear the rest of the rooms. I gave him a curt nod. I'll secure the perimeter. I walked around the farmhouse, stowing the cardboard evidence markers I'd pulled from my glove box when I found the man. 40 feet from the front porch, near the rear, a door hung ajar, a screen door, tattered and hanging off, one hinge. I crossed the mud and peered inside. The kitchen was trashed. Cabinets emptied, broken plates on the floor. The overhead light swung in a slow circle as if knocked. My flashlight beam found a single photograph on the counter, oval, black and white. A family smiling in Easter Sunday finery decades ago. I picked it up, frowned. The faces were fuzzy but unmistakably a younger Avery family. Parents and 2 kids, all beaming. I felt my chest tighten. A creak sounded behind me, wooden floorboard near the back of the house. My heart jolted. I spun, flashlight aimed at the hallway. Silence. My ears rang as a sudden chill ran along my spine. I told myself it was a loose floorboard or the wind. The cold, late summer air held that tension you can taste. Something was wrong with this place. I stepped back out and found Trooper Grant brushing rain from his shoulders. "All clear inside?" I called. He nodded. "Looks like your guy's the only one here, nothing to suggest anyone else." He pocketed his gloves. "But the smell persists. Where do you think it's coming from?" I leaned down, inhaled carefully. Copper tang, but underlying that was something burning. Old gasoline, maybe, or chemicals. Grant's brow furrowed. "That's not right. We need fire department hazmat backup." I thumbed my radio. 14 to dispatch. "Request hazmat and fire on scene. Possible chemical or accelerant residue inside the Avery property." Static hissed. Then, "Copy that, 14. Sending units now." Rain intensified, spattering the earth. We waited in the darkening yard. The man on the stretcher moaned as they loaded him into the ambulance. His eyes fluttered open. He stared at me, confusion bleeding into fear. I offered a quick nod, and the medic gave me the "I've got this" look. The ambulance pulled away, blue lights fading into the night. I sighed, looked toward the farmhouse. Bullet-pocked siding, boards haphazardly nailed over windows. This place should have felt abandoned for years, but the feeling was too fresh. It was as though someone had moved in last week. I realized I'd never seen anyone enter. Grant said quietly, "Cameras around here pick up any foot traffic?" I pulled out my phone, opened CAD for Thornton Crossing. The closest camera was a grainy feed on the main drag, miles away. "No CCTV here. All we have is what we find on scene." He met my gaze. "You up for calling this in to major crimes? I don't like how this feels." I swallowed, nodding. "Yeah, I'll let Captain Kessler know once hazmat clears it." I shut off the beam, and we trudged back to our cruisers, the only sound our boots sucking in clumps of mud. Lieutenant Kessler's office was small, fluorescent lighting buzzing overhead. Early morning sun crept through the blinds, thin slats casting stripes across the linoleum floor. Kessler, a grizzled man with silver-streaked hair and perpetually tired eyes, looked up from the report I'd just dropped on his cluttered desk. "So, what did you find, Reed?" I closed the door behind me, keyed my jaw. Victim was intoxicated, likely assaulted prior to calling 911. No obvious suspects at the scene. Hazmat reported traces of unknown chemicals, possibly accelerants or pesticide residues, lingering in the floorboards. I slid a printed photo of the old family portrait across the desktop. Kessler picked it up, studied it under the overhead lamp. The Avery place burned down 2 decades ago. No residents since. What's someone doing squatting there? I shrugged. Don't know, but it's too fresh to be just vagrants. He said he saw someone else inside when I found him. Heavy smell of something chemical, like something was cooked or dissolved on the floor. My voice lowered. I've been thinking. Maybe it's some kind of lab setup. Meth, fentanyl cooking. But why the pointy injuries on his head? Looks like blunt force trauma, maybe from a pipe or a prior beating. Kessler rubbed his chin, eyes closing for a moment. Lieutenant Carraway will want this in major crimes. Sounds like you stumbled on something far outside a simple welfare check. He stood, gesturing toward the door. Paperwork on my desk? I'll call Caraway. You're off the initial call for now. Go home. Rest. We'll get you back in when we know more. Hugh's voice faded behind me as I walked out, but my mind churned with every detail. The coppery smell, the bruised subject, the wrecked kitchen, and something else. A half-erased phone number scrawled in red pen on a torn sheet of cardboard in the living room. Digits I couldn't make out clearly. My gut told me it was a phone number to something sinister, like a wire to bigger players. At home, I poured coffee and forced myself to sit in the living room, replaying the incident. My phone rang. Unknown number. I ignored it as I did the second call. Perhaps that was rookie behavior. Maybe evidence waited right there on the caller ID. But something free-righted my mind. A quiet dread that someone had known I'd find him. Something watched me, then vanished. Sleep came in fits. When I drifted off, I dreamed of static, of broken glass, of a face too blurred to see but feeling full of rage. I woke at 2:17 a.m., sweat-soaked shirt sticking to my skin. The digital clock's glow felt too bright, mocking me. I lay there listening as thunder rolled in the distance. I tried to shake it, telling myself I wasn't back at the Avery house, but I couldn't outrun the images in my head. I didn't stay home long. I called Caraway at 0400. He barked something about needing my statement firsthand. Meet me at Major Crimes office in an hour. I dressed quickly. Uniform shirt swapped for plain clothes, jeans, and a long-sleeve polo. I grabbed my badge, service weapon, and a fresh flashlight. At Major Crimes, a half-dozen detectives huddled around a conference table littered with evidence bags. The victim's torn jacket, a battered liquor bottle, and samples of chipped floorboard fragments. The lead detective, Marisa Vega, gave me a curt nod. "Reed, walk us through your entry." I paused, took a breath. I arrived on scene at 0230, found subject on bedroom floor, unconscious. Signs of assault, bruising on his scalp, chemicals in the kitchen, no other footprints. Subject's testimony unclear. Said he escaped someone chasing him. Hands shifted paper. Vega's eyes sharpened. Chasing him how? I shook my head. He couldn't say. He mumbled something about a tall man who dragged him inside. Then, when he woke, he saw flashlights and called 911. I leaned against the edge of the table. House itself looked boarded up for ages, but everything inside was fresh. Overturned chairs, smashed cabinets, and that smell, like something corrosive. I flagged the number scribbled in the corner of that cardboard. I pushed the photograph of the cardboard number toward Vega. She peered at it. Likely a burner phone. We've dispatched someone to amplify the image, run it for leeway. Detective Jones piped up. "We traced the VIN on that liquor bottle. Owner's name from a store in Fairview. They sold it 3 days ago." He clicked a link on his laptop to display a GPS map. Camera near intersection saw a silver sedan at 2230. Subject likely in that car. We're running the plates now. Someone murmured acknowledgement. Vega turned to me. "Anything else you noticed?" I hesitated, recalling that odd draft in the hallway, like a door left open too long. When I looked out the window after taking him to the ambulance, I thought I saw a silhouette in the tree line, someone standing watching the house. I dismissed it as my imagination. I winced. Maybe that was stupid. She tapped her pen. Not stupid. That silhouette might be our primary person of interest. Could have been perched near the old barn foundation, still standing just off the kitchen door. She pointed to a satellite image. "We've got a K9 unit sweeping out there now. You were right. Subject was forced in. We found footprints in the mud leading from a broken fence post. My stomach nodded. So someone comes out here to conduct whatever they're doing. We might have a lab or a meeting spot. The detectives shuffled files, toxicology reports, call logs, witness statements. By 0600, they'd interviewed the ambulating victim. He said the man who chased him wore a dark hoodie, face obscured by shadows. He said he heard the man mutter something about finishing the deal before slamming him against the wall. Then everything went black. Vega studied her notes. He doesn't remember his attacker's face, but he kept repeating a name. Carter. Doesn't know who that is. We need to track Carter. She turned to me. You're going back tonight. We need you to watch Block C of that area, the tree line near the barn foundation. I rubbed my eyes, nodding. Understood. That night, my cruiser idled far off County Road 112. Headlights pointed toward the barn's skeleton frame. I parked behind a row of trees, silent as a ghost. I left the engine running, AC to defog the windshield, heater cranked just low enough so I wouldn't freeze. The digital clock read 01:45. Somewhere a whippoorwill called out, and the wind clawed at the trees. I clicked off the dome light, let my night vision adjust. My flashlight rested on the passenger seat, broken into 3 bright beams that refracted across the glass. I kept the binoculars trained on the barn doorway, a dark vertical slit emerging from cinder block walls. The farmhouse was just behind, obscured by tall grass and broken fence planks. My radio remained silent until 0230, when an unscheduled patrol passed by on Highway 7. K9 unit, heading home after a false rundown. I watched their headlights fade, then let out a slow breath. Every nerve in my body said something was coming. At 0245, I saw movement, faint shadow shifting behind the barn. I sat up straighter. The figure, tall, slight stoop, slid along the wall until he vanished behind a corroded propane tank. I keyed the mic softly. 14B to dispatch. I have. Eyes on a male near the Avery barn. Height, roughly 6 feet, wearing dark clothing. Approaching quietly. I paused, adrenaline prickling. No response. Likely too late for dispatch, but I persevered. I grabbed the flashlight, loaded the beam to low, and slipped out of the cruiser. My boots met the wet grass with a muffled hiss. Heart pounding, I kept low. The rain had stopped, but moisture clung to the night. Every footstep felt amplified, the squelch of soil, the creak of broken wood underfoot. First thing I saw was a discarded backpack by the barn's southwest corner. I knelt, shined the beam inside. Empty food wrappers, a torn page from a juvenile notebook with scribbled calculations, what looked like a crude recipe referencing Carter. I swore under my breath. My thumb hovered over the radio, but I held off. No backup this close, too obvious. I edged along the barn's length, keeping the flashlight trained on the cinder blocks. Damp spray faintly glistened under the beam. The figure reappeared on the far side, half hidden behind a rotting support beam. I peered through the shadow. Feet clad in black sneakers, jeans soaked at the knees. In his hand was a small plastic bottle, nearly empty, the label ripped. He paused, sounding something like a whisper. Almost ready. I pressed myself against the wall, pistol out. My breath came slow, measured. 10 feet away, he bent into a low crouch, manipulating a spigot attached to an ancient pipe. Liquid dripped into an aluminum pan on the ground. My eyes tracked the pan's contents. Yellowish liquid, swirling with odd, flocculent precipitates. He poured something else from another flask, clear fluid, watching it hiss as it touched the yellow. Steam rose. Instinct surged. I stepped forward, leveling the pistol. Polk County Sheriff's Office. Drop it." The words felt flat in the night. The figure jerked upright, surprise hitting his posture. He stumbled back, eyes wide when the flashlight hit his face. Pale, eyes hooded. For a second, it didn't register until he recognized me. Officer Reed. A snarl spread across his lips. "You shouldn't be here." My pulse hammered. "You think I won't? Step away from that pan." The beam revealed a crude burner beneath the pan, tubing snaking toward makeshift filters. It was a drug lab, fentanyl or something worse. My stomach twisted. I took a breath, edging closer. "You're under arrest." He nodded once, lips tightening. Then he turned and bolted toward the tree line, boots thudding as he ran. I fired a single warning shot into the air. "Stop! Police!" He vanished into the woods within seconds. I chased after him, flashlight beam slicing through low-hanging branches. Branches scratched my face, soaked my uniform. I hollered, "Come out with your hands. This is your last warning." No answer. I reached a muddy clearing where the only footprints were his and mine. They trailed off toward a creek bed. I jogged down and found him near the water's edge, squatting, rummaging through a plastic bag for a small bundle. I leveled the pistol again. "Freeze. Get on your knees." He spun, eyes blazing. In one swift movement, he lunged at me, swinging something heavy, a ratchet wrench. I barely blocked it, steel ringing against steel. Pain shot up my forearm as metal grazed my flesh. I stumbled, scrambled backward, managing to press the heel of my pistol into his chest. He staggered back, breathing hard. For a moment, his face broke into a twisted smile. "Carter," I said quietly, hardening my tone, "I've got you." He shook his head slowly, chest heaving. "I'm not him." His voice choked. I tightened my grip. "You're dealing with something you can't handle. Just give up." He paused, seemed to wrestle with himself, then suddenly dropped to his knees. His head bowed as though he wanted to pray. I kept pressure on the pistol, reached down and twisted his wrist behind his back, cuffing him. He hissed in pain but didn't resist. I patted him down. In his pocket, I found a blood-stained lighter and a scrap of paper with the name Carter Black, and an address scrawled in sloppy handwriting. I took a step back. "Your friend won't be happy about this." He looked up at me, eyes brimming with tears. He never told me how it'd end. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating his gaunt face. I shone my flashlight on the cluster of burners and vials on the creek bank. The chemicals looked lethal. I snapped a few photos with my phone. I tore off a piece of plastic and bagged the evidence. "He called me in," Carter said, voice trembling. "Said I'd be safe. Said it was only a quick job." His eyes flicked toward the creek. "I thought I could bail before he arrived." I thumbed the radio. 14 to dispatch, subject in custody. Stand by for state police to pick him up. Hazmat's already on site." I ended the transmission. He stayed quiet as I guided him back toward my cruiser. My mind whirled with questions. Who was Carter Black? Who was the man who dragged the other guy into the house? I jogged back and unrolled crime scene tape to secure the barn perimeter. I strapped Carter into the rear seat, slamming the door shut, then walked back to the debris. The creek's murmur felt godless. Moonlight glinted on the rusted burner flames. I knelt and dusted wet dirt off the nearest pan. Smells of ammonia and chemicals filled my nose. My stomach convulsed. I reached for my radio. 14 to dispatch. Request state police and hazmat for an active clandestine lab. Possible homicide in progress. My voice shook, but I forced it level. A breeze swept through the clearing, rattling loose boards from the old barn. I froze, certain I heard distant footsteps. Another person hiding behind the trees. My flashlight beam swept left and right, empty. Only swaying branches, moonlight glinting on wet leaves. But my gut screamed that I wasn't alone. By dawn, the barn was barricaded with police tape. State police had arrived, and hazmat teams flanked the perimeter. Carter sat on the curb, his hands cuffed in front, face pale as bread. I knelt beside him. "You need coffee?" He shook his head. I patted his shoulder. "Camera vans will be here soon. Medics already took that first guy to Mercy County Hospital. He's in stable condition." He sighed. I never wanted to hurt anyone. His voice cracked like bone. I swallowed. "Your job was to help Carter Black. That name, did you know him?" He blinked. "I thought Carter Black was my cousin's nickname. I never saw him. Only heard his voice on the phone." He exhaled. "They said, 'Come here and mix.' Said it was for the people uptown." He cocked his head toward the farmhouse, off limits now. "They called that place the old Avery Lab." I stared at him. "Uptown, as in the city's homeless population?" He's too wired to answer. I looked to the hazmat crew, lowering their respirators. Carrots on a stick, he'd fallen for a trap. My heart tightened. "We'll get to the bottom of this." I stood, brushing dirt off my knees. Detective Vega joined me, clipboard in hand. "Did we glean anything from him?" I nodded. "He's just a runner. Never saw his boss. The code name Carter Black, a phone contact, no photo." She rubbed her temple. "Classic. We'll need warrants to trace every burner phone ping in this county since last week. And who knows how many labs." She sighed. "We're seeing the tip of an iceberg." I followed as they moved up the roadway to block traffic, securing the scene. The hazmat team emerged, carrying bags of vials and a small cooler. The creek bank had been washed and swabbed for fingerprints, samples placed into sterile boxes. I snapped a few more photos for my report. A rumor whispered through my gut. Someone was watching. I stepped aside as a camera drone lifted overhead, buzzing like a wasp. The beam passed over me, leaving me exposed, tiny and vulnerable. My pistol still felt heavy at my hip. I tried to shake off the uneasy sensation that we'd overlooked something. By late afternoon, Carter was loaded into a state police cruiser. He looked up at me, eyes hooded. "You'll find him," he said quietly. "He always covers his tracks." I nodded, staring at his reflection in the window as they drove away. I wondered if he was talking about the man who forced his way into the Avery house and left the first victim so bruised. Perhaps the man standing in the barn shadows. Someone still out there. Back at the station, I buried myself in paperwork. Incident reports, lab analysis requests, call logs. Every time I tried to focus, my mind drifted back to that silhouette in the trees, to the twitch of movement behind the barn. I kept replaying the night in my head, the drain pipe dripping chemicals into that pan, the coppery odor, the hiss of something burning. At 21:15, I got a call from Detectives Harris and Vega. An anonymous tip had come in, stating, "Meet me at the lake by Old Pine Bridge at midnight. Comes alone." They gave me a location marked on the map of Thornton Crossing's edges. Something about the static-laced voice unsettled me, but I couldn't ignore it. I said, "I'll go." Harris warned, "Be careful, Reed. Could be a trap." I loaded the cruiser with a concealed flashlight, extra magazine, and my laptop. I fueled up at the station, checked in with dispatch. 14 to dispatch, watch Channel 2. Subject might come to Old Pine Bridge. I'm en route. They replied, "Copy that." The drive to the lake took 20 minutes. By 23:40, I parked half a mile away, engine idling in neutral. Old Pine Bridge was an arched wooden span over a shallow creek, brutally lit by a single lantern at the far end. yellow dim. I switched to low beam and reflected it off the water. The bridge's planks were weathered and slick, moss clinging to the railings. The lake beyond wavered in moonlight, black as coal. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, approaching on foot, boots careful on the soaked ground. My pulse thrummed so loud it felt like the only sound in the night. At the mouth of the bridge stood a man in a long coat, face hidden by the hood. He didn't move as I neared, just waited. I could hear my heartbeat. I tapped the mic once more. 14 to dispatch. At OPB, one unidentified male, no backup yet. No response. I took a measured breath, stepping onto the bridge. My boots clacked on wood. Echo drifted into the trees. He didn't flinch. My flashlight beam illuminated the front of his coat. No weapon visible, but heavy bulge under the fabric around his waist. I kept the beam on him. "You must be the one who called." My voice cracked. His head tilted almost imperceptibly. No reply. I took another step, heart pounding. "I'm going to ask you again. What's this about Carter Black?" The hooded figure reached inside his coat, and I stiffened. But he raised his empty hands to shoulder height. I exhaled slightly. No games. He took a slow step forward, voice gravelly. "You don't know what you're dealing with." He pronounced every word with chilling calm. "But you're close." My flashlight beam flicked to his right pant pocket. Rolled up photos, faces of people. The first victim's eyes circled in red ink, the Avery farmhouse, the pan with chemicals and scrawled notes. Carter Black. Finish the job. 0425. I recognized that date. Tonight. I moved to grab the photos. He jerked back with surprising speed, snatching the pictures. Before I could react, he hurled them into the creek. They plopped one after another, faces bobbing on the surface before sinking to the muddy bottom. I lunged to grab him by the collar, but he twisted away, shoving me across the planks. I stumbled, catching myself. The bridge groaned. My flashlight swung wildly, beam starring the dark creek bank. I turned back to the figure. He'd already retreated. I called out, "Stop!" "Police." No answer. I hurried after him, boots splashing in the shallow water beneath the bridge. He'd vanished into the woods by the time I splashed onto dry land. Investigation would show tree limbs scratched and deep footprints pressed into mud. But in that dark forest, I saw nothing but rotted logs and tangled ferns. The man was gone. I raised the flashlight overhead. Rain begun again, fat drops spattering on my scalp and shoulders. I scanned left, then right, then the bridge behind me. Nothing. My radio sighed. 14, do you copy? I took a breath. Dispatch, I'm at the bridge. No sign of the tipster. Static crackled. Stand by on channel 1. Backup will check area at 0400. I exhaled, effort leaving my limbs. The wind twisted the trees into strange shapes. I jogged back to the bridge and retrieved my flashlight from where it had fallen onto the planks. The one lantern still shone, its flame flickering like a dying eye. I turned it on, walked the length of the bridge checking for prints. I found none beyond my own. I kept thinking of his final words. "You don't know what you're dealing with." What did that mean? Who was Carter Black? He seemed to know about the lab before I even got there. Someone guiding these people. I felt cold dread, as though I'd stepped on the edge of something far bigger than a single lab. At 200 hours, backup arrived, lights cutting through the pines. They secured the forest line, K9 units sniffing around. By 3 a.m., I was back in my cruiser, hands still trembling as I dialed Caraway. We'd need to dig through countless digits, burner phones, bank records, surveillance from nearby gas stations. My eyes stung with fatigue. I rubbed them and stared at Old Pine Bridge receding in the rear view. 2 days later, Caraway brought me into a joint operation with state troopers and DEA agents. A task force formed to dismantle the ring. Carter Black remained in custody, but they believed he was only a low-level courier, someone they could easily replace. We traced the address scrawled on his note to a dilapidated house in South Vale, 2 counties away. Intel suggested that was Carter Black's contact point. Just before midnight, we moved in. A convoy of unmarked cars converged on the house. A squat, single-story brick building set back behind chain-link fence topped with razor wire. No lights on, we approached in tactical gear. Gloves, vests, helmets, rifles raised. I felt every muscle coiled. At the front door, Detective Vega signaled the breach team. They used a ram. The door crumpled inward with a loud crack. Flashbangs popped, rattling windows. I swept my flashlight inside. Empty entryway, peeling wallpaper, stench of mold. No one inside. They kicked down bedroom doors. Just musty mattresses and empty drawers. I walked to the back door. A faint hum echoed, like a generator. I traced it to a panel recessed behind a false wall in the living room. I motioned for the tech to join me. He flipped off the panel. Inside, he found a tangle of tubes, vials, and a burner still glowing faintly. Orange sparks danced in the damp air. I frowned. Looks like they evacuated just before we got here. He nodded, matching me. All evidence still here, no suspects. I gestured toward a staircase leading to a small attic. Search upstairs. We crept up, rifles trained. The attic hatch squeaked as we opened it. Boxes piled everywhere. Newspaper clippings, faded photographs, records of previous victims or lab sites. On a small table, a laptop lay open, screen cracked. I peered over and read a half-written email. Dispatch, step 2 tomorrow. Make the transfer at the bridge. Verify Carter is in custody. The rest scrolled off screen. My blood ran cold. They're using the bridge as a transit point. Vega's voice came behind me. Whoever is behind this knows our every move. Carter was bait. I rubbed my temples. God damn it. We secured the attic, bagged the laptop, and traced parameters back to a burner registered to someone named J. Franklin, living in another trailer 5 miles from here. I glanced at Vega. One more location. She called it in. 2 hours later, we converged on the trailer, a rusted shell perched on cinder blocks. A single porch light flickered. K-9 unit sniffed around. Harris, leading the point, signaled we were clear to approach. I pressed my forehead against the glassless window, peering in. A folding card table sat at the center, vials arranged in a neat row, and on the far wall, a map. Red pins on every location we'd found labs in the county. Every site marked like trophies. Suddenly, a door slammed behind me. I whirled. A man stood at the door, tall, wiry, eyes hooded in shadow. He wore a crisp suit, unusual among the mismatched techs and junk piled in the trailer. I raised my pistol. "Sheriff's office, don't move." He tipped his head. I was wondering when you'd catch on. His voice was smooth, metallic. He stepped into the dim light. The glow revealed a face with hollow cheeks, a receding hairline and dark circles beneath his eyes. "You have no idea how far this goes." Before I could react, he raised a pistol of his own, a silver 5-inch barrel that glinted in the low light. "Drop your weapon." My finger hovered over the trigger. I didn't lower my weapon. Why not to? Why keep giving us Carter Black names? My voice shook. He smiled, slow and sinister. "Because Carter Black is just the first of many." Lightning flashed outside, lighting up the trailer in stark white. I saw the vials on the table, a dozen or more. My pulse thundered in my ears, I weighed my options: shoot him and risk blowing my shot in a cramped, confined space, or try to talk. My radio crackled. "Detective Reed, are you okay?" Vega's voice. I cleared my throat. "I'm alive." I locked eyes with the man, trying to gauge his intent. He leveled his gun at me. "I've been watching you, Reed." He chuckled low. "You think you're some hero, tracking me down piece by piece, but that bridge, that farmhouse, they're nothing more than puppets in this game." He stepped close, too close. I felt sweat drip from my brow. My heart thundered. I edged backward, pistol aimed low, trying to keep him in my sights. "You're going in cuffs tonight." He tilted his head. "We'll see." As he spoke, he flicked a switch on a small remote in his left hand. The crate beside me, stacked with cardboard boxes, shook. I glanced down. Inside one box sat a plastic canister labeled compressed chlorine gas, valves blistered and corroded. My breath caught. The man had a gas bomb. I snapped to Vega's voice over the radio. "Reed, backup's outside. You have to hold on." I flicked my head toward the attic. The man's eyes followed, then he grabbed my collar and jerked me forward. He tossed me against the wall. I crashed into peeling wallpaper, pain radiating along my back. He pressed the remote to a red button. A hiss filled the room, icy, like liquid fire. I coughed as white mist enveloped us both. Pain burned my lungs. My flashlight beam danced erratically. I heard Vega shout, "Breach!" The door burst open. The silhouette of 3 officers loomed in the haze. I slammed my eyes shut to focus. My lungs screamed for air, but the haze had engulfed my vision. In that white blur, I saw the man standing tall, gun trained on me. Then a sudden crack. The man's chest jerked, and he slumped backward as a single shot rang out. Detective Harris stepped into the doorframe, pistol smoking. The man crumpled where he stood. I coughed, trying to clear my throat. Vega appeared beside me, jaws clenched. "Are you okay?" I panted, leaning against the wall. "I think so." My lungs felt raw, burning. Harris knelt beside the fallen man, checking for a pulse. "He's cold," Harris said softly. The room still hissed with gas. Someone cracked a window, letting fresh air rush in. I sat down, knees against the wall, chest heaving. The man on the floor. No ID on his suit jacket. Only a small lapel pin. A stylized black snake coiled around a dagger. I recognized it from the Avery house's burned-out foundation, etched into an old metal door frame. Vega approached, face drawn. "This was your ringmaster. The one behind the labs." She crouched next to the body. "His partnership spanned 6 counties. We'll need to inform the feds." I nodded. I felt raw grief. Anger mixed with relief. A part of me wanted to stand, chase the damn snake pin into the dirt, but my body trembled. I looked at the scattered vials around us. Poison, death, chains of pain we couldn't yet unravel. I realized, even if he was gone, the network still existed. More Carter Blacks would emerge. I pushed myself up, hand shaking as I holstered the pistol. Vega handed me a pair of gloves. "We'll process this. You need medical." She guided me toward the door. I glanced back once at the snake pin, twisted and abandoned in the filthy carpet. It felt like a promise. This wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I rode solo again. But everything had changed. The Avery farmhouse was demolished. The barn burned under controlled conditions. Detectives continued arrests across multiple counties. Small-time runners like Carter Black. Nobody who knew the ring's true scope. At the station, I drifted between interviews, waiting for the big fish to surface. My sleep was fractured. I still woke sweating, haunted by that hiss of chlorine, that face lit by a single bullet flash. At 200 hours, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, stubbing out a half-burned cigarette, staring at my reflection. Eyes glassy, haunted. On that morning, Carraway found me at my desk, eyes meeting mine. "We've got a lead," he said. I straightened, heart jolting. He slid a printout. A single name in Capitol Bureau of Investigation. Richard Parker, D.O.B., July 12, 1978. Known alias, Snake Dagger. He tapped the paper. The dead guy's real name. He came up clean in every search. No convictions, no ties. But his net of operations spanned 3 states, and he just disappeared 9 years ago. Folks wrote him off, so why pop back up now? I swallowed. We disrupted his lab network, must have sent runners to rebuild, but he stayed out of sight. Carraway nodded, eyes tight. He may be gone, but his ideology lives on. A long silence settled. I ran a hand through my hair. Any idea where he operated last? Carraway shook his head. Some CFO records show money funneled into cryptocurrency wallets, possibly funding sleeper cells. His voice dropped. We couldn't get warrants without knowing more, so for now we keep eyes on any chem labs flagged by hazmat, any unknown persons matching his description. I exhaled, tension sagging my shoulders. I'll watch the DVR feeds on Old Pine Bridge. Might catch him if he tries returning. It was a Tuesday when I noticed something new. A black sedan idling across from the bridge at 1300. I was stationed in the same unmarked cruiser, camera dragging on. I kept low, eyes fixed on the shrouded road. The sedan's brake lights glowed faintly. After 10 minutes, a man in a black hoodie stepped out. Thin frame, head down, sneakers glinting with a reflective strip. My breath hitched. He moved gorilla-like toward the bridge, purposeful, cautious. I radioed dispatch. 14 to dispatch. Possible Richard Parker at Old Pine Bridge. Initiating pursuit. Then I flicked on the overhead lights and accelerated. Tires squealed on the asphalt as I cut across the road, tires kicking gravel. The sedan sped off, dark metal swallowing its shape. I slammed onto the bridge at the same moment the man reached the center, phone in hand, looking left and right. I stepped out of my cruiser, pistol drawn. "Stop! Polk County Sheriff's Office," my voice echoed. He didn't flinch. He raised his phone, squinting at the screen, digits scrolling. He took a step back, then 2, turning to sprint toward the trees. I chased. Each breath was ragged, lungs burning. The gravel path led into thick woods. Rounding a bend, I lost sight of him. I slowed to a walk, flashlight beam cutting through low branches. Every branch reached out, snagging my jacket, scraping my neck. Then I heard him. A snap of a twig 2 feet behind me. I spun, pistol raised, flashlight illuminating nothing but dense undergrowth. My radio crackled. 14B, report? Carraway's voice. I whispered, "Lost him." He sprinted into the pines. I'm searching grid 2. A scream, an impossible, single, thrice-pitched shriek cut through the night. My heart pounded into my skull. I jogged down the path, flashlight dancing ahead. The shriek repeated, distant, but coming closer. I stumbled over a fallen log, bracing myself on my forearm. Pain spiked. I cradled my wrist, face damp with sweat. Then silence. My breath came shallow. My vision tunneled. I thought I heard something scuttle across dry leaves. I trained the beam on the underbrush. A pair of shoes glinted just beyond. I edged forward, pistol trembling. Suddenly, a hand shot out and grabbed my ankle. I fell backward, hand curling around the pistol grip. I managed to kick free and roll, pointing the weapon at a young man sprawled face down, shirt soaked in mud. I panted, stepping back. "Stay down! Don't move!" He lay still. I scanned the trees. no sign of Parker. "Name?" I demanded. His head twisted. I saw shredded blonde hair and a frightened face. He spat a mouthful of dirt. I'm supposed to get you to him," he choked. "He's in the old quarry shack." The old quarry, half a mile from the bridge, abandoned since a mining accident 3 years ago. I called it in, 14 to dispatch, got one suspect. He says Parker's at the quarry shack, possible hostage, sending 2 units, I'm on foot. I cuffed the young man, careful not to look away from the shadows enveloping us. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand. I jogged off, slipping on wet leaves until I saw it. The remnants of a wooden shack perched at the edge of a deep pit. Boards choked with graffiti, broken windows gaping like yawning mouths. From within, I heard faint water dripping, something metallic clinking. I approached, crouched behind a fallen beam, wheelchair length to cover distance. I elevated my pistol, sweeping the interior. Inside, I saw a man at a small folding chair. Richard Parker, unmistakable. The same pale face I'd seen in the trailer, but older, lined by sweat and haggard beard. He crouched over a rusted table, mixing chemicals in a beaker. Glistening shards of ice on the floor suggested he was cooling something. "Sheriff's office," I called softly. His head jerked up. He half smiled. I wondered how long it'd take you. His eyes glittered with strange resolve. I swallowed. "Put your hands where I can see them." He shrugged, hands still busy, swirling viscous yellow fluid. Tiny bubbles clung to its surface. Fentanyl base or perhaps a cutting agent. I could feel the weight of his gaze, cold and calculating. "You destroyed my network, Reed, but you never found my ultimate recipe." He flicked a switch. My flashlight caught a cylinder near his feet. A pumped canister, a valve cocked open. I froze. "Don't you dare." Rain started again, a few drops hitting the tin roof. He stood slowly, tilting his head. "I fed you crumbs, Reed. Carter Black, the lab in waiting, my smokescreen, but you never once saw the forest for the trees." He raised his chin. "This is my final gift to you." Without thought, I squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, echoing off the quarry walls. He jerked, blood puddled beneath him. His knees buckled, toppling into the chair. He slumped sideways, falling to the stained floor. I lowered my weapon, chest heaving. The canister hissed louder, mist swirling around his head. Red pooled around him, mixing with the iridescent chemical. I dropped to one knee, kicked the canister valve shut. The hissing slowed, then ceased. Parker gasped, eyes wide. He reached a shaky hand toward me. I covered him with my pistol. "Stay down," I said, voice wavering. "You're done." He coughed, spit blood. "You saved me." His gaze flickered. I stared down at him, feeling hollow. My radio crackled. 14, do you need assistance?" Caraway's voice. I answered. 10-4, suspect is down, but we need hazmat here. As I backed away, Parker's eyes met mine. He smiled faintly, as though we shared a secret beyond this mortal coil. He whispered, "This night, it never ends." Then he closed his eyes and lay still. It was over. Or so I thought. The next morning at roll call, Captain Kessler told us over murmurs and opened notebooks. Parker's death was ruled justifiable. His network was dismantled, but forensics found traces of something in the beaker, a novel analog, not fentanyl exactly, but a synthetic compound that could kill within minutes of inhalation. They found 6 batches in hidden caches around the county. No deaths yet, thankfully. We'd only nipped it in time. I nodded at the meeting, but my eyes drifted to the window. The sun rose over Thornton Crossing, bathing the station in dull light. I closed my eyes, thought of my family, my boys at home. Part of me ached for the simplicity of routine rounds, nothing more. Later, I sat alone at my desk, reviewing the final reports. The chemical compound would be deemed BTX-17 in lab analyses, something the CDC would write a bulletin about. I scrolled through photos of Parker's victims. Carter Black, the first guy at the Avery house, terrified in the back of an ambulance. Faces in newsprint from the warehouse labs. My phone buzzed, a text from Lieutenant Carraway. Good work last night. No emoticons, nothing else. I stared at the message, then typed, "Thanks. Feels like I lost something." I sent it, closed my phone. I rose and walked outside the station, drawn to the overpass over Highway 7. Below, cars sped by, 10 cars every minute, headlights like glowing insects. It was nearly 1800 hours, but dusk was already settling. I leaned on the guardrail, adjusting my uniform belt. The wind carried a distant whine, sirens maybe, or the hum of traffic. Yellow leaves drifted across the pavement as I stared into the distance. My thoughts lingered on Parker's final words. This night, it never ends. I tried to shake it, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded silhouette on the bridge, the hiss of chlorine, the dying grin. I beckoned the breeze to wash the images away. It felt futile. I crouched and picked a fallen leaf, twisted it between my fingers, watching its veins. In my mind, I replayed the night again. The flash of the pistol, the hiss of gas, and the final sight of Richard Parker collapsing onto the floor. I felt the weight of every call, every siren, every dark house I'd walked into on a solo shift. A knot of dread coiled in my gut, reminding me this was far from over. There would always be another Carter Black, another hushed whisper of chemical synthesis on the wind. The world was full of monsters. Some you could chase down and put in cuffs. Others you could only hope to hold off for a while. Above me, a lone hawk circled against the dimming sky. Its cry faded. I let out a slow sigh, straightened, and squared my shoulders. I'd spent my life walking toward the dark. I'd see the dawn come, then chase the next shadow that slipped beyond the light. Because in the end, the night kept coming, and so would I. I still remember flipping the cruiser's ignition switch and hearing that familiar thrum, the engine settling into a low rumble beneath my seat. It was October 12th, 2019, a Saturday night, but there was nothing festive about it. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, draping Easton County in a damp fog that made every street lamp's glow seem jaundiced and distant. I was sitting in the driver's seat of Unit 22 Alpha, a Ford Explorer with more miles on it than I could track, idling on a narrow shoulder of Route 112. My partner, Deputy Ramos, was leaning back against the passenger door, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup and scrolling through incident reports on his handheld data terminal. There wasn't much chatter between us. He was younger than me by a dozen years, 2 tours in the K-9 unit under his belt, but we both carried a quiet understanding that these October storms tend to amplify the county's worst when it comes to domestic calls. Dispatch crackled over the radio, cutting through the patter of raindrops pitter-pattering on the roof of the cruiser. 22 Alpha, 1023, at 421 Northridge Drive. Possible domestic disturbance. Caller reported hearing screams 20 minutes ago. No further info. Response code 2. The tone of the dispatcher's voice was routine, almost bored, until the final word, code 2. That meant no lights and siren unless the situation escalated. But under a night sky, this heavy with rain, sometimes going in too slow, left you in just as much danger as rushing in too fast. I clicked the mic. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 22 Alpha en route to Northridge Drive, Code 2. I set my cup of black coffee in the center console and shifted the vehicle into drive. Ramos tossed his empty cup onto the floorboard, one of many cheap styrofoam relics we'd cram into the cruiser that night, and slid off the door. "Sounds like another late-night sitcom special," he muttered, voice tight. "Domestic in this county usually ends up worse than any sitcom." I didn't comment. I just watched the speedometer climb to 35 miles per hour as we eased onto the slick asphalt. The narrow rural roads twisted between soybean fields that had long since been harvested, leaving only stalks of dead husks swaying in the wind. The yellow lines in the center of the lane appeared as streaks of mellow light through the raindrops striking the windshield. I flipped on the wipers, but even on high speed they hardly made a dent in the murk. I'm not sure exactly when I first felt it, that gnawing sensation at the base of my skull, that cold crawl of unease in my chest. It might have been when we passed the sign that read, "Entering Ridgewood Farms," and the road ahead narrowed to a single lane. Or maybe it was when I saw the lights of the convenience store vanish 2 miles back, swallowed by the storm. Either way, something about that stretch of road felt wrong. After a mile, we turned onto a concrete driveway that split the fence line in half. A rusted gate swung inward, and mud splashed onto my boots as I parked behind a dark shadow of an SUV. No headlights, no engine, just silent, ominous space. Northridge Drive was little more than a dirt road pocked with puddles, winding uphill past overgrown yards and sagging fences. The rain turned everything to matte black and gray. The trees, the houses, the occasional mailbox perched on a post. When we reached number 421, I killed the engine, and the beastly quiet that followed felt louder than any thunderclap. I clicked off my radio and stepped onto the slippery pavement. My boots sank slightly into the wet ground. "Stay sharp," I said, the words almost unnecessary. Ramos echoed, "Always do." We each checked our belt lines, flashlight on my right hip, Glock at my side, handcuffs mic'd to my left. Ramos was similarly equipped. We moved toward the front porch in near silence, our footsteps muted by the storm. The porch light was out. There was no welcome glow to guide us. My flashlight snapped on, the bright beam slicing through the raindrops like a knife, revealing the front door. Chipped paint, warped wood panels, and the faint outline of water tracks dripping down the threshold. I knocked once, then twice, my gloved knuckles against the wood. My voice echoed inside as I spoke into the night. "Easton County Sheriff's Department. Welfare check requested. Anyone home?" My words felt swallowed by the house. No answer. I knocked again, more firmly this time. Silence. The only response was the hum of my own breath and Ramos shifting beside me. We exchanged a quick glance. I nodded, and he motioned toward the door. The lock gave way with a surprising turn. No resistance, no click, just the softest click of latch hitting frame. Whoever had locked it didn't bother double bolting, or perhaps they'd fled in haste. The door creaked open on rusty hinges. Inside was darkness that felt heavy, as if the air was thick with malice. I took a steadying breath of cold, stale air and stepped inside. Ramos followed, portal light off his flashlight dancing across the faded wallpaper, peeling from the walls in long, curling ribbons that resembled the dry skin of a corpse. "Clear?" he whispered. I shook my head slightly, shaking off the feeling but letting him hear it. We moved into the foyer, our boots thudding on warped hardwood floors, slick with raindrops brought inside. Splash marks led from the threshold to a hallway that stretched to the left and right. The only light came from my flashlight. I scanned to the left first. An empty living room, a threadbare couch with its stuffing exposed, a broken floor lamp lying sideways, and a television set with its screen shattered into spiderweb cracks. My stomach tightened. "House has definitely seen better days," I murmured, stepping over scattered debris. We pressed on, careful to avoid loose floorboards that groaned when we trod on them. At the end of the hallway to the right, a door stood partially ajar, revealing a faint yellow glow from a bare bulb swinging overhead. I signaled Ramos to stay silent, then approached slowly. The door swung open as I nudged it with my shoulder, revealing a kitchen lit by that single flickering bulb. Cabinets hung open, their contents either gutted or thrown to the floor. Plates lay shattered, mingling with broken ceramic shards and what looked like dried blood spatters along the linoleum floor. Because in this line of work, almost everything you first dismiss as rust or mold could very well be something more sinister. I swung my flashlight to the center of the room. A tipped-over high chair lay on its side, its tray stained with congealed milk. On the countertop sat 3 eviction notices pinned under a dull kitchen knife. The last notice was dated September 30th, marked as final. Underneath the top notice, someone had scrawled in red ink, "I won't leave." I crouched to get a closer look. The handwriting wavered. It looked like it had been written standing in a hurry. My heart sank. "Ramos," I whispered, voice low. He shifted into the doorway behind me. "We've got missing paperwork and a weapon left out. No sign of any family members." Ramos jackknifed his flashlight through the doorway. "Look here. No sign of a child's toys or personal effects beyond this high chair. Even if they left in a hurry, I'd expect to see shoes, backpack, something. You don't pick up and vanish with a 6-year-old without some kind of evidence." His words hung in the stagnant air. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. "We need to check the rest of the first floor. Closets, maybe a basement door. And call dispatch. Missing juvenile protocol activated. Let them know we may have a child at risk." I grabbed my radio and keyed the mic. 22 Alpha to dispatch. Possible missing juvenile on premises. Child's high chair overturned. No visual on occupant. Code 3 needed. Send backup and EMS to the location. Dispatch responded crisply. "Copy that. 22 Alpha. Code 3 backup en route. Response units ETA 5 minutes. I clicked off the radio. The second the words left my lips, I felt the weight of the moment settle like a physical force against my chest. A missing child call is always the apex of fear. Once you admit that a child could be in danger, there is no turning back. Ramos circled the kitchen, sweeping the flashlight across the floor. I moved to a door next to the refrigerator labeled pantry. I tested the doorknob, but it was locked from the inside. I tapped sharply on the wood. "Pantry, we're law enforcement. Open up." No response. The hinges groaned. The lock turned easily, and the door swung inward to reveal floor-to-ceiling shelves, all cloaked in shadow. I stepped inside and swept the flashlight across the cans of expired soup, dusty boxes of cereal, and an overturned ladder. No footprints in the dust, only a single, muddy footprint near the far corner of the pantry, where the concrete floor was stained with something dark. I knelt, my fingers pressing against that stain, and realized it was blood, a thin crust, dried and flaky. By the time I straightened, Ramos had found a basement door behind the refrigerator. "Sir, there's a hatch here. No lock, just latched. I'm opening it." He lifted the latch, and the stairs creaked open to reveal a set of wooden steps descending into darkness. A cold draft curled up from below, brushing my spine in icy kisses. I signaled him to spotlight the stairs while I moved to his side. We each clicked on our flashlights, the beams meeting in a tunnel of dim yellow light that revealed plaster walls spotted with mold and mildew. At the bottom, water pooled in small puddles, as if the foundation was seeping and this place was slowly drowning. My radio crackled urgently behind me. 22 Alpha, be advised. Patrol Unit 17 reports a toy truck found outside, southeast side of house. Toy matches description from caller. I exhaled, forcing calm into my voice. Copy that. Dispatch, send K-9 unit for track. Hold any perimeter until we get clearance. I looked back at Ramos. Leave the hatch half open. We need to secure the perimeter outside in case whoever's down there left through a window or side door. Let's move, but stay alert. This place is a maze. We ascended back into the kitchen, each step feeling heavier than the last. Something small, too small, was at risk out there. I motioned toward the side door at the far end of the kitchen. A steel door with a narrow window cracked by age. Rain leaked around its edges onto the floor. But beyond that stain of blood near the pantry, that window was our only path outside. I turned the knob, and it opened inward despite the rain beating at it from outside. We stepped into the backyard, and I immediately caught sight of a narrow trench running the length of the property line. A drainage ditch carved into the earth, half filled with muddy water. At the far end of that ditch lay a single red plastic toy truck, partially submerged, yoke yellow wheels spinning lazily in the current. My stomach turned. "Jasper," I called out softly into the darkness. A few minutes later, I heard the rapid footfalls of the K-9 unit approaching. Deputy Nguyen and his German shepherd. The dog's collar light bobbed like a lonely star in the blackness. "Jasper, track," Nguyen whispered, and the dog lowered its nose, nostrils flaring. Ramos and I moved aside as Jasper padded down the embankment of the ditch, his front paws slipping in slick mud. The K-9 cut across the yard with laser focus. I followed, shining my flashlight in his path. The ditch's muddy water lapped at the embankment, and the wind rustled the dead shrubs that lined the fence, an audience of skeletal branches clacking together. Jasper's bark echoed suddenly, sharp, urgent, breaking the hush. He'd located something deeper in the drain, a small sneaker stuck between rocks. I knelt and picked it up, a tiny red Converse coated in mud, still damp. My breath hitched. I felt a tremor ripple through my chest, like gravity pulling my ribcage tighter. I radioed dispatch. 22 Alpha to dispatch. Child sneaker located. Possible toddler still in drainage ditch. Send EMS to the location. In that moment, everything converged. The overturned high chair, the bloodstain in the pantry, the locked pantry door, and now the toy truck and sneaker. Clues that didn't add up to a voluntary departure. I glanced at Ramos. His face was pale, lips tight. I could see the same dread reflected in his eyes. We dropped into the ditch, the water up to our calves, cold and clinging. The rain had led up to a drizzle, but droplets still hissed on the surface. "Jasper, no further," Nguyen called, motioning us forward. I stepped carefully across slick stones, hinge joints cracking with each move. Ahead, I made out the silhouette of a small shape pressed against the farther wall, a child. My heart slammed against my sternum. Every training seminar, every cold call I'd ever been on came flooding back. How to approach, how to reassure, how to subdue. But this wasn't business. This was a scared kid, alone, shivering, in a puddle of filthy water. "Easy, buddy," I said, voice low and steady. I reached forward, pulling that shape closer. It was a boy, filthy and plumb cold, skin contrasting pale against drenched denim. Mud caked his coat, his eyes wide and glossy, pupils too large for a room this dark. I knelt in the water and cradled him. Hey, it's okay, I've got you. My uniform soaked up water, but I barely registered. What's your name, kiddo? I asked softly, though I already knew. Noah, he stammered, voice cracking, breathing ragged. Where's your mom, Noah? I glanced up to see Ramos and Guyan hovering at the ditches, edge, lights bobbing. I don't know. She said she'd be right back. The lie hung in the air. His tiny voice echoed against dirt walls. I felt my gut twist. Somewhere between the first knock on the door and now, a mother's fear had transformed into desperation. I didn't know which horror had possessed her. Eviction notices, threats of child services, or something deeper still. All I knew was that I had this child in my arms and the rest of the world could wait. I hoisted Noah toward my chest, balancing him as I climbed back up the muddy embankment. I felt each stone slip beneath my boot, the cold water pouring down my pants. Ramos reached a hand down, helping pull me the rest of the way up. Once we cleared the trench, Ramos wrapped his raincoat around Noah. I followed, eyes scanning the yard thrice as fast. The farmhouse behind me was a silhouette of broken shingles and shattered windows. I keyed my radio, voice clipped. 22 Alpha, juvenile secured. Send EMTs to the front yard, confirming possible juvenile in distress. Sending all units to clear the property for a foot pursuit. Dispatch returned. Copy that, 22 Alpha. Backup and EMS en route. Maintain perimeter. K9 assisting. I exhaled slowly, shoving my wet hair from my forehead. I looked down at Noah in Ramos's arms. He was trembling so hard I could see his whole body quiver. You're safe now, buddy, Ramos murmured, voice gentle. You're safe. I crouched beside him, shining my flashlight across his face. His skin was chalk white, lips cracked and blue. I willed myself not to think of how close those lips had come to curdling in that ditch. I'm Sergeant Harris, I said, voice as calm as I could manage. I'm going to get you warm, get you some help. He stared at me for a long moment, big, hollow eyes. Then he clutched my collar, and I felt the weight of all that fear shrink into that small body. We backed away from the ditch into the yard, where the beams of overhead spotlights cut through the mist, revealing 2 cruisers and an arriving ambulance. The bright white of the EMT's jackets stabbed through the darkness. As an EMT approached, kneeling beside Noah, I glanced at the house one last time. Nothing moved in those cracked windows. No sign of life. But I felt certain someone was watching us. Hidden. Waiting. I stayed until Noah was lifted onto a stretcher and the paramedics zipped him into the ambulance, its sirens quiet against the pounding storm. The EMT shot me a curt nod as I helped secure the straps. He's hypothermic, but he's stable. We'll head straight to Mercy Hospital. I nodded, wiping my glove across my brow. I watched the ambulance pull away, lights flashing. An invisible knot tightened in my chest. I still had work to do inside that house. I turned toward Ramos, who'd pocketed his radio and now held his flashlight at waist level. Let's finish this, I said. We ascended the slick front steps together and re-entered the farmhouse through the kitchen door. The yellow bulb still flickered, and the eviction notices lay where we'd left them. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Basement hatch, Ramos reminded me quietly. We need to clear it, make sure no one else is in there. I nodded, stepping across the threshold and flicking my light toward the hatch at the rear of the room. The hatch lay open now, and I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere deep below. I signaled Ramos to flash his light down the stairwell. We descended again, water dripping from our boots, each step plunging us deeper into that basement's gloom. The walls, etched with scribbles and dried handprints, bore the stains of something I still couldn't identify. My beam traced a trail of boxes and broken furniture until it settled on a set of muddy footprints, leading toward a corner where a wooden workbench had been pushed aside. Beneath it lay a narrow trapdoor, roughly propped open. I rested a hand on the trapdoor's lip. The draft that came up smelled of damp earth and something else. Something sour, like old rot. Subsidence, I murmured. The crawlspace is collapsing. We need to be careful. Ramos cracked a half smile. We've got bigger problems if we don't find whoever's down there. Let's hope the kid wasn't alone for long. I dropped to a knee, peering down into that hole. My flashlight revealed a muddy wedge of earth and debris, and, in the center, something that looked like shredded blankets, a tangle of fabric and cord. I reached down, feeling nothing but cold air. I couldn't help but think that time wasn't on our side. That pit was filling with rainwater each moment we waited. I looked past the trapdoor, trying to glimpse some hint of movement. But there was nothing. Just sickly yellow light, the tapping of water on wood, and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I glanced at Ramos. "Cover me." He nodded and angled his light to shine on the space behind me. I braced my boots on the edges of the hole and slid down as quietly as I could, each inch of descent feeling like wading into some unnatural tomb. When I reached the bottom, my boot sank halfway into a thin layer of muddy water. My knuckles curled around the flashlight as I crouched, sweeping the beam across piles of refuse. Broken photographs, scraps of clothing, a child's drawing, crumpled and torn. Then I saw her, Emily, crouched in the far corner, arms wrapped around herself, her face pressed to her knees. Her hair was matted with mud, her clothes stained and torn. My heart seized. I flicked my light outward, shining it on her. She didn't move. I took a slow breath. "Emily?" I said quietly, as though speaking would wake her. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were hollow, glassy. She stared at me like I was an apparition. Before I could say more, her body convulsed in quiet sobs. I felt that old officer's restraint fighting to hold in my frustration and sorrow. There was nothing more terrifying than a deranged mother protecting her child by tearing apart her own mind. I knelt in the muck beside her. "You're safe," I said. "Your son's safe." She shook her head. "They're coming," she whispered, voice ragged. "They're coming for him." She shook my gloved hand away and pressed her face back against her arms. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my breath even out. I needed to calm the situation, pull her away from a breakdown that could end in violence. Every training manual, every crisis intervention class came flooding back. I rose slowly, trying to keep my tone steady. "Emily, I'm here to help. Let's get out of here, okay? You won't hurt him." She shook her head again, pressing her face into her arms as the water rose around us. I glanced overhead. Water had begun leaking in, pooling at my ankles. If we didn't move fast, the crawlspace would become a death trap. I reached forward, extending my hand again. "Come on, I can't wait. We need to go now." She glanced up, tears coating her cheeks, and that was the moment I saw the flicker of reason return. It lasted only a heartbeat, then vanished. Yet it was enough. She took my hand, wincing as my grip lifted her. She clung to me, staggering as I helped drag her toward the trapdoor. As we emerged, Ramos was there, guiding a slippery-footed Noah into his arms. The boy looked up at me, wide-eyed, frost-bitten, and uncomprehending. I paused, letting Emily pull her son close. She sank to her knees, hugging Noah protectively, as though his warmth would melt whatever held her gaze so empty. I stood aside, radio clamped to my shoulder. 22 Alpha, Suspect and juvenile secured. We need an ambulance and CIT team at the front door now. The radio crackled back. Copy that, 22 Alpha. EMS and CIT en route. Security perimeters complete. I took a step back, letting the paramedics push past me. They lifted Noah gently into a gurney, wrapping him in blankets and checking his vitals. I watched as they worked, feeling the weight of everything settle in my chest. Ramos moved to Emily's side, speaking low and steady. The CIT officers arrived moments later, stepping carefully through the mud. They knelt beside her, speaking soft words I couldn't hear. She refused to stand without Noah, but once the paramedics confirmed he was being taken to Mercy Hospital, she let them guide her gently into custody. I stood in the rain-drenched yard, hands pressed against my uniform pockets, watching the lights of the ambulance fade down North Ridge Drive. In the distance, more cruisers arrived, lights crimson and blue splashing across the fields. My radio crackled again, but I didn't respond. I knelt to pick up that crumpled drawing from the crawl space, the one of a mother and child under a bright sun, smiling. The lines were shaky, as if drawn by a child who never dared open the curtains to let the sun in. Standing, I tucked it into my breast pocket. The night felt colder than before, and as I climbed back onto the porch, I took a long, steadying breath. The kitchen door stood open behind me. The eviction notices and the blood-stained knife were gone, collected as evidence. I let my flashlight click off and closed the door gently, as if not to disturb something that had already been lost. The damp air wove through the cracks in the frame, carrying the faintest echo of a child's sob. So faint I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. For a moment, I pressed my palm against the wood, as though the wall itself might explain what had happened. Then I turned away, boots sinking in mud, and walked down those dripping steps. Every step felt heavier than the last. As I reached the cruiser, Ramos slid into the driver's seat, fogged-up windows giving only a blurry view of my face. We sat for a moment without speaking. In the distance, the ambulance siren faded into the night. I swallowed, palms pressed flat on the steering wheel. "You okay?" Ramos asked quietly. I nodded, but the answer was no. I closed my eyes and let the rain patter against the roof, matching the beat in my chest. We both knew that finding a boy in a drainage ditch was a blessing. But what about the mother who'd been locked in that crawlspace for days, her mind frayed to the edges of reality? And what about the child's innocence, stolen in a moment of desperation? Ramos reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. We did what we could. I opened my eyes, saw his reflection in the rearview mirror, tired, damp, haunted. I nodded again, but inside I felt a knot tightening. Once you see a parent become a prisoner in her own mind, how do you ever go back to believing things are normal? The radio crackled behind us. 22 Alpha, any further updates? I let the microphone hang, unwilling to break the silence. Because, until the sun rose again, the night still had answers to give. And we had questions that might never be answered. The rain had slowed to a fine mist by the time we returned to the cruiser, but the ground was thoroughly soaked, as if the earth itself were bleeding. I started the engine, and the dim glow of the dashboard lights revealed drops of water collecting on the glass. Ramos and I sat in silence for a moment, the radio squawking behind us as dispatch coordinated tow trucks and additional units to secure the property. The night air was too still for comfort. The silence pressed in, reminding me that something fundamental in that house had been broken. Ramos cleared his throat. "You want to run to the station and file the primary report?" he asked, unhurried. "Or you want to just sit here a while?" I sighed, rotating my shoulders as though trying to shed a weight. "I need to process it before I file anything." Let's circle back to the substation and at least start the narrative. We know what needs to go in there." He nodded and shifted the cruiser into reverse, backing out onto the muddy shoulder. We rolled down the driveway until we reached the county road. As we drove toward the substation, I glanced at North Ridge Drive, fading into the darkness behind us. The house sat at the top of a small hill, its silhouette jagged against the sky. I thought of Emily, slumped in the back of the patrol car before the CIT team loaded her into the waiting transport. She'd stared at me as we extracted her from that crawl space, her eyes vacant. My knuckles tightened on the wheel at the memory. After all these years, the pain of that hollow stare was still raw. By the time we reached the substation, an aging brick building set along a tree-lined frontage, it was nearly 2:30 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for 2 cruisers idling near the front entrance. Streetlights cast pools of harsh white light that carved every inch of the building into stark contrast. I killed the engine and turned to Ramos. "Sit tight," I said, sliding out of the cruiser. The cold mist clung to my uniform, beads of moisture forming on my shoulders. He leaned over and wiggled the window controls. "Don't lock me out, Sarge," I laughed dryly. "Go ahead, file your report first if you want." He shrugged and hit the lock button on his side of the cruiser. The doors clicked. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching the mist swirl around my boots. There was something surreal about walking away from a place that just moments ago had been a scene of desperation. A place now left in the hands of investigators and crime scene technicians who would harvest the tangible details while I wrestled with intangible dread. Inside the substation, the fluorescent lights flickered on with that familiar hollow hum. The lobby was empty. The front desk terminal sat dormant. I made my way down the hall, nodding at the evidence room clerk as I passed. In the swing office where we write our initial reports, a single computer monitor glowed. The desktop wallpaper was a photo of a K-9 partner from Deputy Nguyen's unit, paws raised as if greeting an unseen friend. I wedged myself into the chair, logged in, and opened the blank template for a juvenile protection welfare check report. The words did not come easily. Each line felt weighty, as though built from lead. I stared at the cursor blinking in the opening field. Date, time of call, October 12, 2019, approximately 1:20 a.m. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, but I couldn't type. That empty white screen mocked me. It needed facts, timelines, bullet points. But I felt far from factual. My head buzzed with fragments. Dim kitchen light, the high chair stained with congealed milk, the eviction notices pinned beneath a rusty knife, that single index card scrawled in red ink, and finally, the image of a small boy half submerged in a muddy drainage ditch. I leaned back, eyes closed, trying to force myself into detached mode. Law enforcement training is about compartmentalizing. Find the facts, collect evidence, check all boxes. But some nights, some calls refuse to be compartmentalized. I forced my eyes open. 2:30 a.m. Deputy Harris and Deputy Ramos responded to 421 Northridge Drive. I typed it slowly, each keystroke a hammer tapping against my nerves. Arrived on scene at 2:35 a.m. Noticed front door ajar, no visible signs of forced entry. Entered premises for welfare check. Located overturned high chair and kitchen. Discovered blood-like substance near pantry floor. Notified dispatch of potential missing juvenile. K-9 unit deployed to track juvenile's scent. I paused, letting the words settle. My chest burned as though ignited by each memory. I needed more detail. Geographic markers, weather conditions, every nuance. Weather, heavy rain, intermittent thunder, temperatures in the low 50s, road conditions slippery due to water pooling. I typed that and felt slightly steadier. I moved through each step. First floor, pantry, basement hatch, K9 track, drainage ditch discovery, extrication of juvenile, retrieval of suspect Emily from crawlspace. I filled in timestamps, officers present, and I wrote victim, juvenile, transported to Mercy Hospital for hypothermia treatment. Suspect transported to Easton County Mental Health Facility under emergency hold. But even as I wrote, I realized that paper would never convey the tension that clung to my spine, the sound of the wind thrashing against the house, the dread that had settled between every sentence I uttered inside that doomed place. After 20 minutes, the basics were recorded. I leaned back again, rubbing my temples. The hum of the overhead fluorescence made my eyelids droop. I glanced at the office door. Ramos was probably back there typing reports of his own. He was good at breaking down facts without emotion. An asset on a night like this. He held the weight in his gut, deflected it into a procedural summary, and that was fine. But I needed one more space to process. A place where I could let the emotional undercurrent be acknowledged, even if just in shorthand. I opened a blank Word document and titled it Personal Notes, Incident 19-0783. I typed. I can still hear him crying, and I was the one who found him. The crawlspace. There was no light except my flashlight. Emily's face, like a ghost, eyes empty. The rain smelled different down there, like earth and decay. The blood on the high chair, on the pantry floor. How did she survive this long? How did she make that drawing of the son and her son? Why was she protecting him from cops? That question claws at me. What do I look like through her eyes? I closed my eyes. In that silent office, the weight of those notes settled on my chest, like a physical force. I saved the file, closed the lid of my laptop, and stood up. I needed to leave this room. Needed to occupy my body so my mind would have space to untangle the knot inside my head. I stepped out into the hallway and walked toward the back door that led into a small garage. The station was mostly quiet. A few officers sat in chairs watching a game on the television, trying to unwind. I nodded to them without words and slipped outside into the mist. The chill air bit through my uniform. I crossed the parking lot and approached the cruiser. Ramos slid out of the vehicle and tucked his hands into his coat pockets. He looked at me with that combination of respect and concern he always wore. "You want to grab some coffee at the diner before heading home?" he asked, voice low. I shook my head. "I'm going to swing by Mercy and check on Noah. Then I'll go home and crash." Ramos nodded, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced I was in any shape to drive. I climbed into the passenger seat as he took the driver's side. In the back seat, I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out that crumpled drawing again. The one with the sun and the smiling faces. I straightened the paper as best as I could, pressing out creases. Even under the diner's fluorescent lights, the colors had turned brown with grit. The sun in the picture was oddly menacing, like a dull, burning eye watching its child. It felt unfair that someone so innocent should have to witness the horrors his own mother had unfolded. We sat in silence as Ramos navigated through the damp, rural roads to Mercy Hospital. The cruiser's headlights cut through the fog, revealing slick pavement and tar snakes slicing across the asphalt. The smell of wet leaves and exhaust mingled in the air. After about 10 minutes, we arrived at the emergency entrance, lights blazing white against the building's glass facade. I killed the engine, exhaled, and prepared myself for the next step. "Be careful," Ramos said as I opened the door. "I'll be right outside." I nodded, shouldering the creased drawing into my pocket. I climbed out of the cruiser and walked through the sliding doors, past the double set of automatic doors, and into the brightly lit lobby. The antiseptic smell hit me first, cutting through every other scent. Nurses and doctors hustled by, 2OH tape on their wrists, scrubs laced with clippings of paper and pen marks. I felt conspicuous in my uniform, dark blues and gunmetal gray, while everyone else blended into the swirl of movement. I approached the desk. A nurse looked up, her expression professional but palpably tired. "My name's Sergeant Harris, Easton County Sheriff's Department," I said, showing my badge. The guard brought in a missing juvenile from last night, Noah Stokes. "How is he?" The nurse tapped a few keys on her terminal. "He's in room 214, stable condition. He's warming up. Hypothermia signs were mild, vitals are normal now. Mom's declined to see him." She glanced at me, as if reading more into my face than she should. "Do you want to visit?" I nodded once. "Yes." She scanned my badge, typed something, then handed me a visitor sticker. "Go right down the hall and take a left. The room's the third door on the right, heavy on that one," she said, nodding toward a set of double doors. "And thanks for getting him out of that ditch." My chest tightened. I just did my job. But her words, though well-meaning, felt weighty. I walked down the hallway, each footstep echoing in my ears. The corridor was dimly lit, a dull hum of refrigerators and faint beeps from monitors behind closed doors. The smell here was a mixture of sterile bleach and something sweet. Flowers, maybe, left on a windowsill. I passed room 213, PEG tube removal, and then room 214, pediatric emergent. I glanced to the right and saw through the sliver of window in the door. A small boy with pale hair tucked into a hospital blanket, staring out at me with large, cautious eyes. I paused just outside the door, feeling an unexpected pang of guilt. He was far too young to understand why his mother had put him in peril. I knocked gently. "Sergeant Harris," I said, "may I come in?" He watched me approach, not moving. I saw the curve of his cheekbones, the dark circles beneath his eyes. He still trembled slightly, though the struggle for warmth must have been hours ago. I knelt beside the bed, folding my hands in front of me. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. His name felt strange on my lips, like the final piece of a puzzle I didn't know how to finish. "You're in the hospital, remember? The nice people brought you here to keep you safe." He nodded slowly, lips parted as though he wanted to ask something but wasn't sure where to start. His small hand clutched the edge of the blanket. Before I could say more, a chill ran down my spine, an instinct honed over years of late-night patrols. Something told me that the danger hadn't ended when we walked away from that house. My stomach clenched. I shifted my gaze to the window behind him. Outside, I could see the lights of the substation behind the sprinkler's mist, and there, in the reflection, a blurred movement that vanished before I could focus. I lifted my head, peering into the shadowed corridor beyond the window. Nothing. But I knew that some threats don't wear human faces and don't make themselves obvious. Not yet. And even as I forced myself to meet Noah's eyes, I realized that the tension from last night wasn't done with me. It wasn't done with anyone who'd seen the shape of fear in a child's face. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice was caught in my throat. The memory of that dark crawl space, the echo of water pooling at my ankles, the sound of Emily's sobs, all of it rose up like a tide, threatening to wash me under. I exhaled slowly. "You're safe here," I whispered. I let my hand rest on his shoulder. "I promise." His eyes flicked to me, searching. I forced a small, reassuring smile, though my stomach coiled with a nameless dread. Because even as I said those words, I knew that some nights leave scars you can't simply promise away. The danger might have retreated into shadows for now, but shadows have a way of stretching again, and when they do, there's no telling what else might come crawling out of the dark. I walked out of room 214 and paused just inside the hallway. The overhead lights flickered momentarily, casting long rectangles of illumination that alternated with brief darkness, a strobing rehearsal for the dread that churned in my gut. I clutched the doorframe, steadying myself, as if bracing for the current of memories that threatened to sweep me away. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face pressed against her knees, flames of mud and blood tracing her features. I fought to erase that image, but it was etched into my mind with deeper ink than any crime scene photograph. I exhaled, pushing the vision aside, and moved down the corridor toward the hospital exit. Just beyond the sliding glass doors, the night air was a fine mist, colder than I expected. A streetlight cast pale halos across the parking lot. My cruiser sat where I'd left it, headlights on a dim setting so I wouldn't blind oncoming traffic, but enough to indicate my presence. I climbed inside, settling into the driver's seat. Ramos looked over from the passenger side, half reading a printed copy of his report. He glanced up. "Everything okay?" I nodded slowly, but the corner of my lip twitched. "There's something I need to check at the station." He closed his folder, looked at me carefully. "You sure you don't want to call it a night? I can finish up the paperwork, follow up on that potential suspect lead." The words landed on me like a gentle prod. Time to stop. But I felt there was more to do, at least for me. "No," I said. "I need to know if anyone's still in that house." He raised an eyebrow, but accepted it without question. I started the engine, and we headed back toward Ridgewood Farms Road, the cabin of the cruiser humming with the steady beat of the wipers. I tried not to think of how the wind in that crawlspace had smelled like decay. Tried not to recall how Emily's whispered "they're coming for him" had scraped at my nerves. But every time I blinked, I saw that note again. "I won't leave." When we reached Northridge Drive, the house was no longer our responsibility. Crime scene unit had cordoned it off. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, refracting the cruiser's headlights into streaks of hazy light. Forensics vans were parked at odd angles around the property, their red and blue lights pulsing against the rain-slick asphalt. I killed the engine 100 yards away and we approached on foot. I didn't want to step in too close. Once forensics start setting up, the scene is sacred ground. I stopped at the perimeter tape. Deputy Palacios, a crime scene tech I knew from years past, nodded from behind a cluster of cones. "Hey, Harris," he said, voice muffled behind the hood of his rain jacket. "We're clearing it out. Looks like she stayed in that crawl space for 2 nights at least. Found empty soda cans, some dog food cans, like she lived on junk for days." He held up a pair of nitrile-gloved hands. "Blood stains everywhere. We've collected samples from the pantry floor, the high chair, under the hallway rug. The basement hatch was propped up with a wooden beam. Honestly, this place is a biohazard. Mold, rat droppings, zero ventilation. The K9 unit had to lead us by scent. No lights, no footprints. She was completely off-grid." I nodded, but it felt like I was listening to someone else's description of a nightmare. "What about the rest of the family? Have you identified any notes or letters indicating foul play?" Palacios shook his head. "Nothing beyond that index card you found in the crawl space, transferred to evidence. We did find torn pages from a children's book, Where the Wild Things Are, scrawled with messages in red, that's all." I closed my eyes, recalling each message. "They will never find me. You cannot take my world." A mother's plea turned manifesto. The ink had bled into the damp paper, page edges curling like the mountain laurel in winter. The tension in my chest flared again. I opened my eyes. Anything indicating where she might be heading if she left on her own? I asked. Palacios glanced toward the woods on the property's edge. Tracks suggest she tried to make it into the thick brush but couldn't go far. No footprints beyond the tree line. She must have collapsed nearby. I exhaled. Thanks. He saluted me awkwardly and backed away, letting his team reclaim the farmhouse. I turned toward the cruiser, each step measured, as if trying to keep the flood of that night contained. Ramos slid after me. I'm going back to write supplementary, he said. You sure you don't want me to file this one? I shook my head. I need to talk to the psychiatrist on duty, make sure she's in the system. If she doesn't check in on Emily by morning, we need to know so no one slips through. He gave me a look that said, "Careful, Harris." But he let me go. I watched him disappear in the darkness behind the squad car, then approached my own vehicle. Just as I settled behind the wheel, my radio buzzed. 22 Alpha, update. Suspect transported to Easton County Mental Health Facility. Arrival confirmed. Juvenile no longer in immediate danger. I clicked the mic again. Copy, dispatch. Initiate R&I, radio, and investigate for possible child endangerment. Notify CPS. The radio responded, "Copy that, units notified." I killed the engine and let the cruiser coast to a stop, lights blinking in standby. The wrenching silence returned. I pulled the crumpled drawing from my breast pocket. Son and child, drawn in thick crayons, the horizon line crooked. I studied it, thoughts racing. A child's perspective on a world that devours innocence too quickly. I slid the paper into a clear evidence bag pulled from my BDU pocket, tapped the bag, and then retucked it behind my seat. Some things need to be recorded, even when they don't fit neatly into a report. The night was still early, but the adrenaline was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. I started the engine and slowly merged onto the county road, heading back to the substation. The lights inside the cruiser reflected off the poster of a missing adult that hung above my dashboard. Years-old pictures of smiles and wide eyes looking for answers that never came. Now, I had another face to remember. Back at the substation, I didn't bother writing more. I tossed the radio on the passenger seat and shut off the interior light, letting darkness claim the cabin. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the steady beep of the building's security alarm in the distance. In that hush, I felt the memories swirl. The feel of Noah's tiny hand tightening around my uniform, Emily's rocking sobs beneath a single dangling light bulb, the squat of the drainage ditch. Each image, no matter how hard I tried, refused to dissipate. I reached for my cell and typed a quick message to the lead psychiatrist. "This is Sergeant Harris. Contact me ASAP regarding patient Lee, Emily. Date of birth, June 19th, 1972. Was admitted tonight from 421 North Ridge Drive. CEMS report. Possible danger to infant juvenile. Needs status update." I pressed send. Then I placed the phone face down on the console. Part of me expected to feel relief once I'd done all I could, collected evidence, ensured Noah's safety, confirmed Emily's admission. But relief is a luxury reserved for silent nights, which this would never be. I leaned forward and pinned my badge to my breast pocket, like body armor against that hollow ache. At that moment, an echo in my mind felt almost physical. Emily's voice whispering that she wouldn't let them take her son. In a rush of anger and sorrow, I realized she had never consented to let us save him. In her mind, we were the threat. The realization sent a cold spike down my spine. How many other times had I been the faceless they in someone else's worst nightmares? How often did my uniform symbolize danger rather than safety? A rattle of wind popped a branch against the windshield. I reached up and closed my eyes as though shutting out the storm outside might stave off the storm inside. Minutes passed. I felt my muscles relaxing, the tension draining from my shoulders, but not all the way, because I knew that in a few hours I'd be back on patrol. Lights cutting through fog, boots slapping pavement, questions in my head that might never find answers. And I'd carry that weight with each call, a silent companion to every scene, reminding me of what I had witnessed. At length, I turned the key, killing the engine. The world outside became utterly still, save for that faint hum of the station's alarm. I stacked my notes on the passenger seat and stepped out, the chill air biting at my cheeks. I locked the cruiser, turned, and walked into the station's lobby, the door's chime echoing. I passed the bulletin board of missing persons and pinched the edge of the plastic-covered photo of a young woman who'd been gone since 2017, still awaiting closure. Now I had another missing person to add. This time, not a stranger, but a friend. Emily, lost in her own mind. I made my way through the corridors to the locker room, peeled off my uniform in silence, and hung it neatly on the hook. Underneath, I wore blue scrubs, my second uniform for the night shift, part of a pilot program pairing officers with the hospital liaisons. I kept them on and ran a hand through my damp hair. At least, I thought, I'll have a chance to see Emily's status, to make sure that when she woke up, there would be someone there to try and help her find the broken pieces she couldn't assemble alone. I stepped into the locker room's fluorescent glare, kicked off my boots, and rubbed my collarbone, still stiff from kneeling in that crawlspace. A wave of nausea rose. I pressed my palm against the tile wall and closed my eyes. The tile was cold, grounding. I held my breath. The memory of the damp, musty crawlspace air flooded back, the shards of memory sharper than knives. I forced myself to open my eyes. A pager on the bench buzzed. I yanked it off the hook. Harris. My heart leaped. My mind leaped ahead, anticipating the worst. "Sergeant Harris, Mercy ER," said the familiar voice of Nurse Callahan. "Can you call back on the station line? We got a 5,150 hold signed for Emily Lee. We need you to confirm custody protocol before we proceed." My chest tightened again. A 5150 meant she was a danger to herself or others, a psychiatric hold for 72 hours. It was what I'd requested, but now it was real, and part of me felt like I'd reached for a lifeline only to watch it vanish. I punched the station line number into my phone. "Harris," I said, and waited. Callahan's voice came back. "As of 4:30 a.m., she's under emergency detention. We need an officer to approve transfer to the county facility at 7 a.m. I also need any additional notes you may have from last night." My fingers itched to type into a report. Victim, juvenile, safe, discharged to aunt's care. Suspect in crisis, detained. But I closed my eyes, remembering the way Emily had mumbled about the world coming for her son. Some things don't fit into neat categories, on a form. I took a slow breath. "Nurse, let me get you the DPS code section and I'll email the notes." I hung up. My legs felt unsteady, as though the tile floor might shift beneath me. I collapsed onto the bench, head in my hands, and let the tears come. Quiet, hot tears that hardly felt real. Even though I'd kept my emotions in check for hours, the dam inside me had finally cracked. A lifetime of witnessing pain, of holding back the panic, of bracing for the worst. All of it was coming to the surface now. I sat in that locker room under harsh white light for nearly an hour. The station's corridors echoed with distant footsteps and muffled voices. normalcy marching on around my private moment of collapse. My phone buzzed again, a text from Ramos. "Everything good?" I typed back, "I think so, but I can't shake her eyes." I put the phone away. In that silence, I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted to file more reports or just bury this deep inside and pretend it never happened. None of the forms, none of the procedures would ever capture the full horror of how a mother could be driven to bury her own sanity. When my breathing slowed, I stood up and wiped my cheeks on the sleeve of my scrub top. I peeled off the scrubs and replaced them with my uniform, wet from earlier, but I'd get them cleaned later. I laced my boots, feeling the leather tighten around my ankles. I strapped on my duty belt, adjusting the tension gently. Flashlight, radio, gloves, cuffs, a ritual that felt like putting on armor before battle. In the hallway toward the evidence office, I passed a caged bulletin board listing the homicide suspects, missing juveniles, and wanted felons. For a moment, I let my gaze linger on the missing juvenile board, a row of laminated photos pinned between missing from home flyers. Each face was frozen in a moment of innocence. I thought of Noah, fragile but alive, and then of Emily, trapped in her own broken world. My reflection shimmered on the plexiglass as I moved on. I walked to the side door of the station and paused, hand on the knob. Outside, the storm had finally stopped. Dawn was creeping over the horizon, a bruised purple smear above the rooftops. I stepped outside, letting the chill of pre-dawn air wash over me. The station's lights made long shadows across the parking lot. In the east, I could just make out ripples of gold staining the sky. I walked over to my cruiser and slid into the driver's seat once more. Ramos was still filing his report at the captain's office. I turned the key, the engine humming, and took a moment to watch the sunrise. Orange and pink light seeped into the mist, painting the rows of leafless trees with a fragile warmth. It felt like a promise, but promises can shatter. I took a steadying breath and flicked on the overhead cruiser lights, only white this time, and pulled onto Ridgewood Farms Road. My assignment for the rest of the day, normal patrol. Welfare checks on drunks passed out behind wheel. Traffic tickets for speeding vehicles, perhaps a call about a stray dog. But everything had changed for me. In every shadow, I would see that she'd been there. Emily, digging a tomb for herself. As I drove east toward my first patrol beat, I thought about how the sunrise always came after the darkest part of the night. But some nights leave darkness that lingers beneath your skin long after dawn's light. I did my best to muster calm, a polite nod to the world that waited for me, but my mind refused to rest. She won't leave. They'll come for him. Even now, that phrase churned like a mantra in my head. I rolled the cruiser's window down slightly. The air whipped inside, smelling of wet asphalt and dew. I let it fill my lungs, hoping it would ground me, anchor me to reality. I flicked on the radio. 22 Alpha, going 10-8 on Patrol Sector Bravo West. ETA 6 a.m. for briefing. Dispatch responded. I eased into the lane and pressed the accelerator. As I drove toward the sunrise, the tension built again, the road stretching in front of me like a gauge for how long I could pretend I'd left that house behind. But in my mind, the scenario remained paused at the exact moment I felt Noah's weight in my arms, protected but still in danger. I reached up and rubbed my face, hoping to wash away the images, but the dirt and fear remained. Patrol calls came in at intervals, nothing significant. A domestic argument in a trailer park down the road, a drunk driver found asleep in his car. Each time I responded, but my mind traced a path back to that farmhouse, down to that basement hatch and to Emily's final, desperate words. I found myself clutching my flashlight a little tighter, one hand sliding toward my service weapon at every unfamiliar sound. By mid-morning, the sun hung low and bright in the sky, the dense fog broken. I pulled into the county public works lot to check on a report of a broken fence along a road I'd patrolled earlier. As I parked and stepped out, I realized I still wore my rain-soaked uniform shirt under my windbreaker. I peeled it off and unzipped my windbreaker enough to hang the shirt on the mirror, though I knew I'd have to get it laundered. The chill from the windbreaker clinging to wet cloth reminded me that I'd been immersed in water just a few hours ago. Water thick with mud, leaves, and the weight of childhood terror. I spent the next couple of hours writing supplementary notes, following up with the mental health liaison about Emily's status, and coordinating with CPS to ensure Noah's aunt had legal custody paperwork. Each email and phone call felt like closing one more loop, but none of it eased the feeling that something still lurked beyond the edges of my awareness. Something that whispered, "They will come for us all soon enough." By early afternoon, I finally returned to the station to drop off evidence and hand over my initial report to the lieutenant. I left behind the bullet casings, the torn pages from a children's book, and that crumpled drawing, now tacked, along with everything else, into the vortex of bureaucracy. I walked out of the evidence office, shoulders hunched under the weight of the chain of custody receipts. The lieutenant gave a curt nod. "Good work." I offered a tight-lipped nod in return. We both understood that good work was just shorthand for "we'll survive this." I made my way upstairs to the squad room. A couple of rookie deputies were laughing in one corner, treating coffee like a lifeline. One offered me a cup. I shook my head. Instead, I slid into a vacant chair at my desk and closed my eyes. Even in midday brightness, the fatigue from that crawlspace pressed on my eyelids. I rubbed my face, then looked at the clock. 2:45 p.m. Another 12-hour shift awaited me tomorrow, but hours felt irrelevant when your mind was still trapped in last night's darkness. I reached for my phone and opened a new text message to my wife. She'd called twice overnight, left messages asking if I was okay. I typed, "Long night." "We rescued Noah. Emily's in psych. I need rest. Love you." I pressed send. The reply came within seconds. "I'm proud of you. Try to get a good meal and relax." I closed the phone and sat back, letting the fluorescent lights blur around me. I glanced at the blank screen of my laptop. Unsaved thoughts where I'd started typing my personal notes. 100 words, then 200, and they'd gone still. The cursor blinked expectantly. I resisted the urge to fill it. Some things simply couldn't be captured. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote on the margin of my notepad these words: "Some nights shape the rest of your life. I found a boy. I carried him to safety. But what if nothing is ever safe again?" The words sank into the paper. A deputy called out for me from across the room. "Lunch orders?" I pushed out of my chair and willed a reply that didn't sound like a ghost. "I'll grab a burger from the diner." I zipped up my jacket. As I stepped into the hallway, the shifting sunlight outside seemed too bright, an affront after hours spent in gloom. I blinked, steeling myself for that return to normalcy, to trivial calls, dash cam footage, lunch specials. But behind every normal scene I would still see a drainage ditch, a torn book, and the face of a mother who would never let go. By the time I reached McCormick's Diner, a greasy spoon at the crossroads of Main and Fifth, my stomach rumbled. The neon "Open 24 Hours" sign flickered above the door. Inside, the linoleum floor was sticky underfoot, and the smell of cooking onions and bacon wafted through the air. A jukebox in the corner played a scratchy old country tune. The booths were half filled with early morning shift workers sipping coffee and nursing the remnants of their last meals. None of them knew what had unfolded just miles away. I slid into a booth near the back. The waitress, ginger hair trapped in a messy ponytail, a spare name tag that read Cindy, slid a menu across the table. "What'll it be, hun?" she asked, pen poised. I let my gaze drift to the chalkboard menu. 2 eggs, any style, hash browns and toast, $5.99. Bacon or sausage, add $1.50. I forced a nod. "I'll have that. Bacon on the side, please." She smiled politely. "Coming right up." I stared down at the menu as if reading some cryptic message. I blinked and finally tore my eyes away. My boots left muddy imprints on the vinyl seat. The diner's warmth contrasted with the cold I still carried inside. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a half-empty pack of smokes, a crutch I rarely used these days but felt compelled to light tonight. I tapped one against the table. Cindy returned with a styrofoam cup of coffee, black as night, and a cheeseburger. How I shifted from eggs to a burger, I didn't know. I exhaled a drag of smoke into the overhead vent and took a long sip of coffee, caffeine jolting my brain awake. I closed my eyes. A flash of daylight in the crawl space. I heard Emily's frantic whisper, "They'll come for him." I forced myself to breathe deeply, the diner's aroma of frying grease mingling with the acrid residue of smoke. I thought about how hard it was to tear a mother's identity away from that child, how self-preservation can twist into a warped sense of duty. I licked my lips, tasted bitter ash. I took a bite of the burger, salty bacon, melty cheese, crisp lettuce. The greasy comfort felt like a lifeline. Yet, with each chew, I felt the weight in my chest not lessen but sharpen. 5 hours had passed since I'd left the farmhouse, but the tension hadn't dissipated. It had decanted into something more insidious, a looming dread that spread from my gut up to the back of my skull. I lit another cigarette, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. A group of 3 men at the counter were laughing about some game they'd seen on last night. Ordinary chatter that felt surreal to my ears. One slapped another on the back, told a joke that made no sense to me. I felt detached, as though I were spectating life through a thick pane of glass. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the on-call psychiatrist at Mercy. "Harris, Emily Lee's admitted on 5150. We tried to find her child's history. CPS has no prior reports. She refuses to see him. Estimated hold period, 72 hours pending evaluation. Will update." I stared at the screen. Refuses to see him. My stomach cupped in pain. Not pride, not relief, nothing. Just a raw, unfiltered ache. I pocketed the phone. I stared at the half-eaten burger. I thought, there's no way she could refuse to see Noah. But in her mind, I guessed, he was the only one she could protect. I took a final drag of the cigarette, less for nicotine, more for distraction. I stubbed it out on the edge of the ashtray, the hiss when metal met ember echoing inside me. I paid the bill, cash, no tip, and walked out into the damp afternoon air. I clicked the remote, popped the trunk, and tossed the half-finished styrofoam box into the trash. I slid inside the cruiser and started the engine, the radio humming quietly. I navigated back onto the county road toward Easton City, where I would report in for my next shift. The sun filtered through the overcast sky, illuminating patches of the road. I flicked on the AC, but the cold air that hit my face felt hollow, as if the world were playing a cruel joke, teasing me with freshness while all I had tasted was decay. I turned onto Market Street, passing the rows of shuttered storefronts. A homeless man slept under a bridge in a ragged blanket. A woman in a suit rushed past, clutching a briefcase. Kids with backpacks strolled to the high school, laughing. The scene should have felt normal. It should have been normal. But my mind replayed that kitchen, the gleaming blade, the scattered eviction notices. The mental images had become over-etched. A drunken call for backup from distant family members would be a relief compared to what I'd seen. I arrived at Easton City Dispatch, an unassuming red brick building with a single glass door. I checked in with the sergeant on duty, who slid me a new assignment file. Suspicious person, 3rd and Broadway, possible armed subject. I scanned the file, just the usual. Neighbor reported seeing a man pacing on a rooftop holding something metallic. Description vague. I signed for the assignment and stepped back into the cruiser. Copy that, dispatch. 22 Alpha en route. I merged into traffic, periodically glancing at the child's drawing pinned on my dash by a magnet. The sun in the picture looked menacing now, more like a glaring eye than a friendly star. I tried not to think of the willowy passage of time since I'd found Noah. 4 hours? 5? It felt like a lifetime, folded in half by desperation and fear. The traffic light turned yellow, then red. I stopped at the intersection, engine idling. The man in the next lane leaned on his horn for a beat too long. I glanced at him. Mid-20s, leather jacket, tattoos. He kept honking. I rolled down my window and gave him a look that said, "Knock it off." He frowned and hit the horn again. Impatient. The light turned green. We went through. I flicked my turn signal toward 3rd Street. The cruiser swung into a narrow alley, brick walls closing in on either side. The call sheet indicated the rooftop sighting was near a warehouse. Long abandoned, windows boarded, a "for sale" sign rotting at the entrance. I parked a block away and approached on foot. The warehouse's rusted metal door was chained, but there was a gap in the plywood covering one of the windows. I shone my flashlight through the crack. Inside, aisles of broken shelving and heaps of debris. The faint flicker of a cell phone screen glowed in the back, like a lonely star in a ruined sky. I dialed my radio. 22 Alpha, potential suspect in a restricted area, armed location. Backup requested. I ducked under the broken window frame and landed in a patch of mud and shattered glass. My foot cut slightly on an exposed shard, but I didn't feel it. My senses were sharpened by last night's adrenaline. The weathered floor slanted toward the back wall, where a silhouette formed against a dull glow. I pressed my back against the crumbling brick and drew my flashlight. Easton City PD. If you're armed, put it down and raise your hands. My voice echoed in the warehouse's cavernous space. No response. Only the hum of an old refrigerator unit near a metal pillar. I edged forward, scanning every corner. The beam found him. A skinny young man, jacket hood up, kneeling by a makeshift camp of sleeping bags. In his lap, a metallic glint. Maybe a pipe, maybe a knife. He rocked back and forth, talking into that cell phone. The screen's light illuminated his face. Pale, hollow, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I took a few more steps, trying to keep my breathing steady. The young man's words were mumbled, but I caught fragments. "I can't," she threatened me. "I don't have a choice." I felt a chill. Another ghost story or a cry for help tangled in fear. I flicked on my radio mic. 22 Alpha, I have the subject. He's holding what appears to be a pipe. I'm approaching. I holstered my flashlight and drew my service weapon, unsteady but controlled. Each step forward felt heavier as I recalled how easy it was for a situation to spin from mundane to mortal. The subject's breathing was jagged. I recognized that as the sign of a body ready to fight. I lifted my voice. "I need you to calm down. You're hurting nobody by putting that down and talking to me." He glanced up, cell phone's glow revealing a face etched in panic, like he was lost in his own personal horror. "They'll come for me," he hissed, voice trembling. "I won't let them take me." His words plunged me back to Emily's crawlspace. I took another step, keeping my weapon trained but not aggressive. "Who's coming for you?" He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. They own this place." I swallowed around my fear. "No one owns anything. Put the pipe down and we can talk." He glanced to his right, past me into the warehouse's gloom. His eyes widened. "They're here." He stood, raising the pipe. I couldn't tell if he meant an unseen force or something tangible, but his panic was palpable. I felt my pulse shift into overdrive. This was turning into a hostage scenario if I didn't manage it right. I gripped my weapon tighter. "Drop it slowly. I don't want to hurt you." The pipe glinted in his hand. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I kept my stance firm. "If you come at me, I'll have to defend myself." My voice was calm but firm, my training kicking in. The space felt too small, too cramped, like a pressure cooker locked in a thunderstorm. He backed toward a corner, dark shelves behind him. His breathing rasped. "I'll die before I let them take me." The phrase felt like a mantra, self-fulfilling. I stifled a groan. This wasn't just a young man. It was a person paralyzed by fear. My stomach roiled. I forced myself to remember, disengage emotionally. Focus on de-escalation. "Nobody's going to take you. I'm here to help. Let's step outside and talk, okay?" He clutched the pipe tighter, knuckles white. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I blinked, trying to wipe it away. "Okay, look, if we don't talk, this ends badly. You're breaking the law. People could get hurt. But if you put that down, we can figure something out." He swallowed, eyes tortured. The flicker of the phone was the only light in that cavernous ruin. Then, that flash of movement behind him. A shadow at the warehouse's rear door. I whirled, gun raised, but saw only empty gloom. My pulse seized. Every hair on my body rose. The warehouse felt alive, pulsing with some unseen threat. The young man's eyes darted to my shoulder. He knelt, pipe still in his hands, and began sobbing, as though he understood. "I don't want to die," he whispered. I lowered my weapon to single action, pointed but not raised. "You won't. Just drop it." For a moment, the warehouse was suspended in silence. Then he slowly placed the pipe on the dusty floor. I exhaled, but my chest felt trapped. Ramos's voice crackled on the radio. 22 Alpha, backup at location. ETA 2 minutes. I called back, "Copy that." I approached slowly, keeping my weapon leveled at his back. As I got to him, I saw the cuts on his knuckles, dried blood at his fingernails. His eyes darted behind me, toward that warehouse corner where I'd seen the flash. I scanned again. Splintered wooden pillars, stacks of rotten crates. Nothing, just layers of shadow. I knelt and secured the subject's hands with plastic flex cuffs. He folded against the crates as if he would shatter under the weight of his own fear. "Hey, it's okay," I said. "It's done." He didn't respond, just nodded once, shoulders shaking. I called into my radio. "Dispatch, suspect detained." No weapons found beyond that pipe. Sending request. For a medical clearance. Subject appears extremely stressed. I stood, scanning for backup, and then a voice came from the far end. "Sarge, Nguyen's K9's here." Deputy Nguyen stepped into the space, his K9 jacket soaked but the dog alert. "All good here?" I asked. He nodded. I cleared the perimeter. No sign of others. I exhaled. "Thanks." As they escorted the teenager out, I swallowed the last of my fear. But the warehouse lingered, dark, wide-open shell, as if it had swallowed every shred of daylight and spat back a hollow emptiness. The floors were slick with spilled chemicals and mold. I imagined Emily's footprints carving a path to her doom. watched as her world twisted around that single thread of tragedy. Once the subject was in the back of a cruiser and Nguyen's K9 was back in his handler's ride, I turned my attention back to the warehouse. I felt drawn to that darkness, as if it symbolized how easily someone's mind could become a labyrinth from which there was no escape. I strode to the entrance, each step echoing on the concrete floor. The early afternoon sun that filtered through grimy windows cast long bars of light. Dust motes danced in the beams, swirling like trapped fireflies. I retraced my steps to the boarded-up window I'd entered through. I pushed aside a loose board to look inside once more. The dim light faintly illuminated broken shelving and that tossed cell phone display. The air that seeped out smelled of mildew and half-remembered nightmares. I thought of Emily's whispered words and how she'd believed they owned her world. Here, in this forgotten place, it felt as though someone else's nightmares had taken root. I exhaled, blinking against the gloom. I closed my eyes. If Emily had imagined they coming for her son, maybe this boy had imagined they lurking on rooftops. Fear sells false futures. It takes a piece of you and shreds it into splinters. I straightened, the sun's glare through the window catching at my reflection. It was a fractured visage, split by half-clouded lenses, a face that had seen too many evenings like this. I stepped away. As I closed that board back into place, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see movement in the darkness, some sign of that ghostly threat. But there was only silence. I slid outside, closing the window in my mind as well. I patted my uniform's breast pocket. No crumpled drawing this time. I had left it behind. I told myself it was safe there, in evidence lockers and digital files. But I knew that some things don't stay locked away. They leak out in nightmares, in sudden jolts awake, in the corners of empty rooms. I climbed into the cruiser and dropped my head against the headrest for a moment. The late afternoon light streamed through the windshield, warm and unrelenting. I closed my eyes, letting it burn across my eyelids. When I opened them again, I left the warehouse behind and returned to a precinct where everyday life awaited. By the time I got back to the station, the sun had fully broken through the overcast sky. The locker room was empty, so I left my uniform there and changed into plain clothes. Notebook and pen in hand, I headed for the lieutenant's office. The lieutenant sat behind his desk, gray-haired and stern, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "You okay?" he asked without preamble. I nodded curtly, sliding a small manila envelope toward him. "Found this at the scene." He lifted the envelope and opened it. Photographs, pages torn from that children's book, the high chair photo, the drainage ditch shot. He flipped through them, face unreadable. "You managed to save the boy?" he asked. I nodded again. "Yes, sir. Hypothermic, but he's stable." He set the photos aside. "Good. Now, what about the suspect?" "She's being held on a 5150, I said. "I got confirmation from Mercy. No prior CPS involvement. She hadn't reported any issues. We tapped resources for Aunt Cindy to get temporary custody. CPS is following up tomorrow." The lieutenant exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Sounds like you covered everything." He met my gaze. "But do you need a break?" He didn't say it as an option. He asked it like a genuine concern. I ran a hand over my stubbled jaw. "I'm okay." He nodded, but I saw that he didn't entirely believe me. I stood and tucked my notebook in my jacket. "I'll keep on patrol for the rest of the shift," I said softly. "Just want to put the hours in." He gave me a curt nod. "All right, but be careful, Harris." I offered a short nod and left the office, aware that each step rang louder in the corridors than any siren. I made my way to the squad room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and rookie deputies looked up, half curious. I nodded to them. They knew better than to ask about last night's call. Some things are unspeakable. I pressed a steaming cup of coffee to my lips, bitter but welcome. I took a long sip. My stomach churned, but I swallowed anyway. The call screen lit up. Suspicious package at 8th and Pine. Possible alarm. I clicked accept and grabbed my coat. I paused at the door, hand on the handle. In that hallway, I could feel the memories swirling, ready to pounce. Death, fear, the echo of a child's sobs. I exhaled. Let's do this, I murmured to myself. I stepped outside into the afternoon, sunshine glaring off the pavement. I climbed into the cruiser, strapped in, and flicked on the siren light. No sound. As I drove toward 8th Avenue, I felt the tension bristle inside me. Alive, unrelenting. Every few seconds I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see shadowy figures perched on rooftops, waiting to take me. I forced my eyes to focus on the road ahead, but the past few nights had taught me that you cannot outrun fear. You can only hold it close and hope it doesn't swallow you whole. My name is Marcus Carter, and this happened in late 2011 when I was a patrol sergeant for the Brookfield County Sheriff's Office, a quiet stretch of land tucked between farmland and thick woodland in northern Washington. I remember that night like a faded photograph. Edges blurred, but certain shadows forever seared into my mind. The shift had been routine until we patched a call for a welfare check at a trailer park on the outskirts of town. We were 10 to 8 and rolling in my cruiser, lights off, engine humming low against the steady drizzle of autumn rain. My partner, Deputy Elena Morales, tapped her fingers on the dash, half listening to the radio traffic. 10-4, she said into her headset, confirming instructions from dispatch. Our call was simple. Middle-aged man. No one had seen him in 24 hours. His neighbor was worried because the old neighbor's well pump ran daily, but nobody heard that thumping all morning. We hit 1023 at the trailer park entrance, narrow gravel road lined with rusty mailboxes, then eased our cruiser into the dim glow of a single flickering street lamp. The damp air smelled of wet pine, mud, and something faintly metallic that I chalked up to decaying autumn leaves. We got out, 10 to 15, lights full up, boots crunching on gravel, and I watched Elena scan the trailers with her flashlight beam. 3 units sat clustered in a loose semicircle while residents peeked from porches. I knocked on the nearest door. A woman in slippers answered, face pale under a tuft of tangled hair. "Afternoon, ma'am," I said in a calm, even tone. "Sheriff's office. We're here to check on Gerald Pruitt. Neighbor said he hasn't been seen since last night." She blinked like she'd woken from a dream. He went out to get firewood yesterday afternoon, never came back. I thought he was just staying with his brother in Spokane. Elena and I will check inside, I told her. She nodded, stepping back. Then she pointed to a trailer 2 units down. "That's his. It's number 7. He kept some kindling inside because he said he was too worn out to chop out back." Elena slipped in first, sidearm drawn, but muzzle pointed low. I followed, scanning with my TLR-1's flashlight attached to my duty belt. The interior was cramped and musty, like stale air had lived there longer than the man himself. Floorboards creaked under my weight. We called out, "Sheriff's office. Gerald, you okay?" But there was only stale silence. The smell of wood smoke lingered, despite no fire lit, and I saw a small stack of split logs by the propane heater. The heater was cold. No movement, no sound beyond the faint whir of the fridge. Walking deeper, I noticed a screen door ajar leading to a small dark shed behind the trailer. I radioed dispatch. 10:23, we're at the trailer. Checking out back. There was static, then acknowledgement. I glanced at Elena. She gave a tight nodding. You go in. I watched the door. I stepped into the shed. The boards were warped and slick with mildew, and the weak beam of my flashlight revealed stacks of firewood, a chipped axe head, and a small folding camping cot with an old wool blanket, threadbare at the edges. On the wall, a calendar hung, open to November, page marked with reminders. Doctor's appointment, pump the septic, check the well. Nothing about leaving town. Then my foot hit something soft on the floor. I crouched. It was a faded baseball cap, a child's Red Sox emblem. I didn't know why a kid's hat would be here, but I tucked it in an evidence bag. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. I tapped my mic. Deputy Morales, I've got a child's cap in the shed. She called back, voice low. On my way. I backed out, heart pumping. On the ground near the ramp was a wet footprint, boot tread smeared by mud. It wasn't Gerald's. His boots were size 10. These were smaller, maybe size 7 or 8. A cold knot formed in my chest. I radioed for units to canvass the park and began jotting notes in my pad. Then I headed back inside to check the living quarters more thoroughly. The trailer looked empty. No coats, no sign of Gerald packing. The bed was made as if untouched. I pulled open the closet. 2 shirts hung neatly, a pair of boots on the floor. Nothing else. Next to a tiny dining table, I found a small TV tuned to static. The remote lay on the floor, melted as if snapped underfoot, but there were no burn marks on the carpet. That detail flicked a switch in my mind, like someone left in a hurry, maybe leaving an imprint in panic. By now, Elena had radioed that they hadn't seen Gerald anywhere else on the property, but did locate fresh footprints leading north toward the tree line. We decided to follow them once units arrived. Before stepping out, I paused by the fridge. Inside, I found a scrawled note taped to the freezer. Gone to check old barn near Miller Road. Back tonight. The handwriting looped, shaky. I crumpled the note into my pocket. No timestamp, but a clue. We geared up. Flashlights, extra magazines, radios set to channel 2. It was nearing sundown and the sky turned slate gray, shadows drifting like predators. Deputy Bailey and 2 other officers formed a loose line as we approached the woods alongside Miller Road. The woods were thick with old-growth fir, the ground slick with needles and moss. Rain spattered on our jackets, each step sinking into a sponge of decaying oak leaves. Elena called a 10-4 on my mobile and we hustled toward an old barn form seen from the patrol map. Local legend said it had been abandoned since the 90s. Roof partially collapsed. No power, no phone. I remembered reading an old report. Rural teens used it for parties. Sheriff's units shut it down after a brawl. Now, it was nothing more than rotted wood and crooked beams. I radioed, "This is Carter to dispatch. Visual on barn, nobody outside. Approaching 10 to 15. We formed a wedge, stepped onto the creaking wooden porch of the barn. The door hung lopsided, wobbling with a reluctant moan when I pushed. We entered. My flashlight caught shattered milk bottles, rusted tools, and a spiderweb thick enough to tangle fingers. The smell of rot was overwhelming, mixing with a faint odor of sweet gasoline. 2 large windows were boarded up. The gap at eye level let in the fading light. No footprints on the dusty floor, but part of the old hayloft ladder was missing its bottom 3 rungs, like someone had taken it down to make climbing easier. Elena whispered in my ear, "Something isn't right." Ah, my pulse thudded. We swept methodically, left side first, clearing each rafter's shadow, checking beneath collapsed hay bales. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. Just stale air and our breathing echoing off the rafters. I thought of Gerald's calendar in the note. If he came here, I should have found something. His boots, a coat, even a dropped hat. But only that child's cap up at the trailer. Then Deputy Bailey's light caught something. A crate pushed into a corner. I flicked my light to it. It was an old wooden crate stained dark, paint chipped. Something inside shivered with a wet, rhythmic patter, like breathing. I kicked it aside. Underneath lay a burlap sack tied shut. I grabbed the metal tie and yanked, unwrapping it. Inside, I found a muddy pair of work gloves, soaked denim overalls, and a man's boot, caked in red clay. My heart jolted. I called out, "Elena, get back up to the barn. 1013, possible evidence." I slid the boot over to inspect the sole. The pattern matched the footprint outside the trailer. Gerald's boots had a simple block tread. These had a deep lug pattern. Something was off. This boot wasn't his. As I rolled the overalls aside, the light caught a glint of silver. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses, smashed but still identifiable. An old prescription. I pocketed both items. The breathing sound grown steady, but it wasn't coming from inside the barn. It echoed from beneath it, from somewhere below the floorboards. I checked the perimeter. Near the back, I found a wooden panel that sagged inward, its latch rusted open. A crawl space beyond. I radioed dispatch. "Carter to all units. Crawl space at rear. Possible entry." I dropped to my knees, used my flashlight to look into the darkness. Damp soil. Rotted joists overhead. The smell here was worse. A mixture of mold, old sweat, and something else I couldn't name. I grabbed my glove and crawled in. Elena pressed close behind, her radio clipped to her vest, static faint in my ear. We moved through the tight trench, maybe 2 feet tall, 8 feet long, knees and elbows digging into pine-stained earth. As the crawl narrowed, the wooden ceiling sagged lower, forcing me to crouch. My flashlight beam illuminated scuff marks in the dirt and footprints, smaller than a man's size, but marching alongside larger treads at times. I swallowed hard. At the far end, a rectangular opening opened into a rough-hewn pit. I dropped into it, gravel scrunching under my boots. The pit extended maybe 10 feet out, then a ladder leading up into a similarly sized room. Brick walls lined with damp sandstone, water pooling in the corners. I heard squeaking. 2 K9 units barking from above, pacing back and forth, alert. My flashlight swept across a pile of old mattresses damp with age, and then, there, a quilted blanket draped diagonally, concealing something large. My hands trembled as I approached. I lifted the blanket's edge, revealing another pair of wire-rimmed glasses. Similar style, smaller lens. Beside it, a folded red sweatshirt with a Brookfield Little League logo. My breath caught. These items belonged to a 9-year-old boy who lived just 2 trailers down. His mother had reported him missing 2 weeks prior. My radio crackled. "Sergeant Carter, units en route." I took a deep breath, gripped the handle of my firearm. Suddenly, I felt a shift behind me, as if the walls themselves inhaled. That's when I heard the soft whimper. I moved the blanket fully aside and saw a bunk carved into the brick wall. A small child, pale as chalk, lay curled up on a dirty mattress, eyes wide and terrified. I reached down and gently brushed his shoulder, murmuring, "It's okay, buddy. I've got you. You're safe now." He flinched, but didn't shudder away. I lifted him into my arms. He was emaciated, shivering, and coated in damp dirt. "What's your name?" I asked, voice gentle. He whispered, "Tommy." His words stuck in my chest like splinters. I lifted him, carefully climbing the ladder as best as I could. At the top, Elena pulled us both out, helping me set the boy down. I wrapped my coat around him and spoke softly. "Tommy, you're going to be all right. We've got you." But as I looked back into that pit, a sliver of cardboard slipped from my boot into the dark hole. I flicked my light down and saw Pruitt Firewood Company, 2007, stamped on it. Gerald's old work gloves had come from that same place. Connections started to form, a ragged pattern of terror. We began to haul Tommy to the ambulance that had just squeaked to a stop. I called Med 1. "We've got a juvenile, code 3, hypothermia, possible injuries. Origin, barn at Miller Road." The lights in the barn flickered as the wind shifted, rattling the boards overhead. Something inside me flickered too, an understanding that we weren't done yet. Tommy was taken to Sacred River Hospital, bundled in blankets, IV in hand. He could barely speak, just clung to my jacket as if it were a lifeline. I gave his mother the news. "He's safe. He's alive." She collapsed into sobs, hugging me like I was his father. That evening, I sat at my desk in the sheriff's office, reviewing evidence. The cap, the glasses, the sweatshirt, the child's frantic scribble on a small piece of paper found in Tommy's pocket. "Help him." It was written in shaky handwriting that reversed letters and spelled daddy as daddy. I debated staying late, but exhaustion weighed me down. I slid into a worn chair, heart pounding with unease. At 2 a.m., I received another page. 10:23 from dispatch. Possible sighting of a suspicious man near Miller Road barn. I met Elena and Deputies Bailey and Forbes at the break room doorway. We suited up. Tactical vests, flashlights, handcuffs, radios. The rain had turned to a fine mist. The world silent save for the rumble of highway traffic. We got into 2 cruisers and headed back to the barn. The radio was dead silent, but dispatch's voice crackled in once we entered the county line. "Stand by for updates. Be advised, homeowner reported hearing screams around midnight." We parked a block away, hitting 10 to 15 as we approached on foot. The barn loomed like a half-open maw, its shape jagged where the roof had collapsed. The wind whipped through the gap, sending a moan through the rafters. I clicked my flashlight on, its beam splitting the darkness into sharp triangles. The "Do Not Enter" sign at the front door hung by one rusty nail. Inside, the stall walls were splattered with fresh scuff marks. This time, vertical streaks of what looked like muddy handprints. The damp, sawdust floor had been scuffed in a pattern like someone had dragged something heavy. Elena lingered at the entrance, radio pressed to her mouth. "Sergeant Carter, you copy?" My voice sounded flat, as if I'd lost my own echo somewhere between hope and dread. "Copy. Checking inside now." The barn smelled of rot mixed with decay, like a cellar left open. We swept through the ground level again. Nothing except overturned crates and deeper scratches on the walls. Then, behind a loose plank near the back, I spotted something new. A nylon rope looped around a post. The rope was frayed at one end. I pocketed it as evidence. I swept the beam toward the rear corner. There, I saw a trapdoor I knew was newly patched. Fresh wood, nails still rusted brown. My gut twisted. I checked with Elena. "Ready?" She nodded. I shoved it open. The hinges screeched, metal scraping metal. My flashlight illuminated the ladder descending into blackness. We climbed down, boots tapping on wet wood. At the bottom, the pit was deeper. An enclosed room, maybe 15 feet wide, no windows, just damp stone walls. A single, bare bulb hung from a frayed wire, flickering like a dying heartbeat. The light revealed cages built from rebar and wood, rusted bars gripping creaking hinges, The cages were empty. My heart sank deeper. That's when I heard the tin crash. From behind me, in an adjacent chamber, a bucket fell over, clinking on concrete. Elena and I sidestepped as Deputy Bailey followed behind with his light steadier than mine. We saw it was a supply room. Shelves half-stocked with canned stew, the same brand Tommy had clutched. Boxes of dehydrated meal bars expired by 5 years. A few blankets stained with old sweat. Nothing alive, nothing immediate. But then, my light caught a smudged set of footprints leading to a corner. A pile of clothing lay there. Jean jacket, flannel shirt, boots with dirt caked thick. Items too small for a grown man. Then a high-pitched whimper, someone at the far end of the corridor lying prone in a burlap tarp. I moved forward, laced my boot carefully over stray boards. Beneath a beam of flickering light, I saw a young woman, pale, maybe 22. Her hair tangled with leaves, arms bound behind her back, silent tears carving tracks down her cheeks. She looked up at me, face hollow, and mouthed, "Help." My throat closed for a second. I eased toward her, pulling a knife from my sheath to cut the rope binding her wrists. Her skin was cold as she clutched the knife's handle, and when her arms came free, she immediately hugged herself, shivering as if her blood were frozen. I called out, "She's alive. We've got one female, need extraction." Suddenly, a metal door slammed somewhere above, and our radios crackled. "All units, suspect may be headed east on Millwood Lane, foot pursuit." The urgency snapped us to attention. Elena and I helped her to her feet. Her eyes darted, breath ragged. I crouched, whispered, "You're safe now, we're taking you out." She nodded once, then stumbled as a loud crash echoed above our heads. Something large barreling down the stairs leading to the floor. Elena grabbed my shoulder. "We've got to move." I scooped the woman up, carried her toward the ladder. As I reached the top, I felt a surge of adrenaline. My lungs burned as I popped out into the barn's ground floor. Elena right behind with Bailey pulling the girl's legs. We half ran, half slipped across the wet wood, dragged the woman outside into the mist. She gasped at the cold air, blinking as if reawakening. Then she collapsed, and we lowered her gently onto a tarp spread by rescue personnel. I raised my flashlight to check inside again, but a shrill bark from the K9 unit halted me. A German shepherd tugged at its handler's leash, eyes locked on a shape ducking behind the collapsed roof. I raised my Glock at the blur. I fired one shot. The figure dropped. It was a man in tattered clothes, half hunched, clutching his side. When I motioned for backup, the man raised his face, eyes wild, a mix of fury and relief. I recognized his gaunt features the moment I saw him, Gerald Pruitt. He stared at me, panting, his shirt soaked red where I'd struck him. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, voice thick with pain. Then he slumped to his knees, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. Below us, a bloodhound's bark cut through the mist, signaling another body or another hideout. I felt a chill, something deeper than the night air. I grabbed Pruitt's arm. "Gerald, you're bleeding. Hang on." He gripped my jacket, eyes flickering back and forth between me and the dark barn. "He's down there," he croaked. He found her first." The word "her" caught in my chest like a knife. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. He shook his head, bewildered, then passed out. We took Pruitt to an ambulance and the young woman, later identified as Marisol Alvarez, to Sacred River Hospital. As the paramedics loaded them, I radioed dispatch. "We have a Code 3 emergency. Pursue suspect east on Millwood Lane. Confirm possible victim inside the barn." I turned to Elena, her face pale but determined. "Start writing up the scene. I'll secure the area." She nodded and began coordinating with other units and evidence technicians. Standing beneath the rain, I stared into the yawning barn doors. I heard something from the edge of the woods, like a faint gasping sob. I trained my light on a cluster of brush and saw a pair of children's sneakers poking out. I whispered into my radio, "Possible juvenile down that hill." Within minutes, another deputy had pulled up 2 children, 8 and 6 years old, dirty, huddled, crying. Both wore matching Brooksfield Little League sweatshirts. I knelt beside them, heart pounding, as I asked, "What's your name?" The older boy whispered, "Matt." The younger, "Lucy." They looked at each other, then back at me. I ran my hand through Matt's hair, wet from rain and tears. "You're safe, okay? We've got you." That moment, my flashlight illuminating their tear-streaked faces, felt like a pivot in the night. A promise I couldn't break. The medical examiner's van arrived at 0500, 2 hours after we'd first entered the barn. I watched as the techs carried out 2 bodies, one male, mid-30s, skeletal and beaten beyond recognition. One female, late 20s, face bruised, eyes closed in death's final grace. They wrapped them stiffly, as if their muscles had already forgotten how to move. I didn't want to look, but I did, had to. I forced down bile, turned my head toward the north field, where yellow tape fluttered like cautionary bunting. Inside, more bones lay scattered beneath rotting plywood, remnants of older victims, children and adults alike, some with tiny shoes half buried in the dirt. The rain washed over them, dragging mud across lacerated bone. JPEG flashes from crime scene cameras lit the barn interior in jagged freeze frames. A shattered crib frame, a half-chewed teddy bear, pages from a child's workbook torn in 2. All around lined newspaper clippings, young faces circled in red ink, pictures of missing persons from local towns spanning a decade. I recognized one faint face, Tommy. Another was a boy named Danny Turner, missing in 2007. I stepped back, pressed my palm to my forehead, and closed my eyes. Each breath I took felt like a betrayal. The world was spinning, and I was rooted to the spot. Elena came up beside me, hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I forced a nod. "We'll get them justice," she said, voice firm. But we both knew justice could never undo the hours those victims spent in horror. By dawn, the barn was stripped for evidence. Biologists tested soil samples. Homicide detectives cataloged each scrap of paper on the walls. Forensics floated through, dusting for prints. I found myself in a small mobile command trailer at the edge of the property. Lights flickering overhead, coffee turning cold in a styrofoam cup. The chief of detectives, Sandra Briggs, approached with a folder heavy with preliminary reports. She put a hand on my desk. "Carter, you did good. This was your call. You trusted your instincts." I stared at the folder. Pruitt's booking affidavit, Marisol's statement, Tommy's medical chart. "Chief, I need to know why you think Pruitt's done this alone for years." "How'd he keep them hidden?" I asked. She glanced out the trailer window toward the barn. "He wasn't alone. We found tunnels beneath the floorboards, but they led to a secondary chamber not discovered until today. We believe he had a confederate, someone from the community, possibly someone with access to supplies, someone who could bring food without raising suspicion." My jaw clenched. Someone had been so close for so long, looking through our community with impunity. My mind raced back to the list of missing person flyers in the cabin. I'd only scratched the surface. I spent the next 12 hours coordinating with SWAT to secure Pruitt's double-wide trailer on Miller Road, where he lived for the past summers, if you can call that living. Inside, we found crates of birth certificates, school records, stolen IDs, and a ledger with names, dates, and places where each victim was found. One entry read, Tommy Alvarez, November 12th, found. Another line, Marisol Alvarez, November 2nd, extracted. A third line, Danny Turner, August 3rd, 2007, solved. It went back to 2005, 8 years of terror. On a separate page, the name Harold Jenkins scratched out, followed by SNR, silent no resistance. The code SNR made my blood run cold. It meant silence not required, a twisted term Pruitt used for victims who were quiet, pliant. That night, back in my bed, I stared at the ceiling. Tinnitus buzzed in my ears. The weight of every face I'd seen crawled across my vision. Silent children, haunted women, elderly folks who simply disappeared. I tried to sleep, but my mind looped over each step I took, each decision. I kept wondering, how many times did I pass Pruitt on the road and think nothing of it? How many calls to my own house had I answered without a clue about this monster down the street? I felt exposed, raw. By November 15, 2011, the press had dubbed Pruitt the Brookfield Butcher, though there was no butcher's blade, just a methodical cruelty I can't ever make sense of. In court, Pruitt sat in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, expression blank. He refused to speak except to whisper, "They're all free now." His eyes darted at me whenever I passed. I kept my face straight, remembering his lean frame in that pit, how he clutched the edge of the ladder as if it were salvation. In jail, he finally started talking. He told detectives he'd grown up in these woods, learned secrets in trees and clover, he said, that he believed people carried pieces of themselves into the earth. Blood, breath, fear, tears, and by trapping them here, he was safeguarding their essence for eternity. He said the walls were listening, feeding on static, whispering names at night to keep him company. None of it made sense to me. His words were riddled with delusion. But what terrified me was how calmly he described each victim. She asked me for water, he said of Marisol. I gave her water. I listened to her heartbeat slow until she slept forever. I remember that afternoon I went back to the trailer park where Tommy's family lived. Rose Alvarez hugged me when I walked in. Her eyes were hollow but grateful. She whispered, "He asked for you. He said you saved him." I knelt by Tommy's bedside. He lay under bright hospital lights, bandaged arms, tubes from his nose to his stomach. He pointed to a drawing taped to the wall next to his bed. A man in uniform holding a flashlight over a smiling child. He wrote under it, "Thank you, Officer Carter." My throat closed, and I swallowed hard. That night, I drove through Brookfield town, radio squawking softly in the background. The streetlights glowed pale, flickering above closed diners and shuttered storefronts. Everyone looked safe in their homes, but I felt like an intruder among them, like I'd peeled back a thin veil to find something rotten beneath the surface. At home, I sat on my porch in the damp chill, staring at the gravel road that led to the barn. Empty now. The air smelled of cedar and rot. I felt my hands clench the arms of the rocking chair. My heart pounded so loud I thought neighbors might hear. Days passed, and then weeks. The investigation expanded to neighbors, ex-girlfriends, anyone who might have helped Pruitt. We found that Harold Jenkins, a handyman who did odd jobs around the property, had disappeared in 2008. Jenkins's tools, chainsaw, sledgehammer, were still stashed under Pruitt's shed. Jenkins's truck was missing, nowhere to be found. They assumed he was another victim until his remains surfaced months later in an overgrown pit near the old logging road. He'd been bludgeoned,